There we go. Just move some stuff around. I have a lot of things up right now. Making sure this is all good. Okay, so welcome to the AWS Cloud Security Meetup group. We're really happy to have you tonight. We are today going to be having Rafael Troncoso first present on Kubernetes security. And then we also want to thank our sponsor, Rhythmic Technologies. We're very excited to have them. Christina, if you want to mention the speaker for, a little bit of what he's going to be talking about as well. You're on mute. There we go.
Sure. Our speaker today will actually be the CEO and founder, Cris Daniluk. He'll be speaking on the automation of Terraform and security in AWS. I'm not the technical one, so he'll give it way more justice to this. But hang tight. We got a lot of cool things in store for everyone today.
Yes, I am excited. I hope you guys are all too. So as a group, my main goal, and I hope it's the goal of everyone who is attending, is to kind of create an environment where we can all be together to learn from each other, give each other advice and tips on AWS security, on our experiences, and just any stories you want to share. We're always open to finding new speakers who want to just help educate our community. These are some of the topics that we try to get through for the meetups that we have, just to really help create secure environments. These are specific topics that we've had throughout the last year, and some that we are waiting to have talks on. If any of these kind of like call to you and you're passionate about talking about any of these, definitely let me know. Or if there's something still about AWS or just cloud security that you're interested in and want to talk about and help educate our community on, also let us know. We're always looking for speakers, as I mentioned. I always like mentioning this slide, the shared responsibility model, because as much as AWS is responsible for the security of the cloud, we're as users and as a user group, we are responsible for the security in the cloud. So we want to make sure we're doing our part to secure our things and help not just our companies but our customers have that trust in us. Yeah, and as always, thank you guys all for coming. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for all of the attendees, for all of you guys, and the speakers. So I really want to just let you guys know that I appreciate you guys being here. We are in the future going to be setting up something for like a study sessions for AWS certifications, most likely the security specialty one. If you're interested in helping mentor or helping mentee, definitely reach out through the Meetup app, and we can, we're still trying to set something up once we get enough people. And then, since you're here, definitely abide by our code of conduct. Just don't be an ass. Like I have there, really small. It's really about respect and making sure we're creating a safe environment. So if you see something, say something. We'll definitely do our part to make sure that all reported issues are resolved. And our upcoming events for next month is we have one on June 10th for addressing cloud security with OPA. And on June 30th, AWS asked us to share their public sector summit online registration. So you can go on to our Meetup group and click on that event and register for the AWS Public Sector Summit that they've switched online, virtual this year. And new, just a disclaimer, everything that I do for this group is strictly volunteer. I work for AWS now, but my opinions are my own, and I'm just here because of you guys, because I like being part of the community just as much as you guys like attending. I also am looking for future organizers, so if you're interested in helping out and volunteering as well, definitely send me or the other organizer a message through the Meetup group. And I think that about sums up all the announcements. Cool. So now I'll switch it over to Rhythmic Technologies, who we're very excited to have sponsor us today, and they'll let you know a little bit about the raffle that they're doing, but also just about their company, their vision, and what they do. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm going to share my screen here. Give me just a moment. Also, I haven't seen Rafael's name pop up, so you're able to give him co-hosting rights.
Yes.
All right. Does everybody see this?
Yes.
Great. I'm not trying to look for head nods.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. Alrighty. Well, thank you for joining us today. My name is Christina Meehan from Rhythmic Technologies. We pretty much, it's going to be a good time. We have a lot of cool things in store, and I love this group. Thank you again, Sarah, for this opportunity to be here with you today, as well as the many others on the call. So just to get started, just a quick little overview. I will try to make it short and sweet. There's a lot of words. I will not be reading off the PowerPoint. So, all right. So who we are. Rhythmic was started over 12 years ago. We essentially, we're an MSP, a typical MSP, so to speak. That has since changed. We found ourselves in the past few years really taking this journey on and providing back a better value to our customers and our future clients as the AWS guides for them. As AWS has definitely grown over the last 10 years, being a huge platform for a lot of folks, it's quite difficult for folks to navigate it alone. So we are essentially your AWS Sherpas for it. So we have some cool certifications on there. I won't be reading that, but it's been really great to see this team grow and see the direction we've been able to go into to provide back better value for our clients. Some of the key services we have. So what I like to call this is the managed service and compliance is like the doorman, keeps an eye on who's coming in and out of the room. That AWS managed service is kind of like your personal assistant, keeps your day running smoothly, it knows where your agendas and things are. And then the AWS DevOps consulting, I like to call that best friend for hire, right? Best friends for hire want to make sure you succeed in life. They're going to tell you the good and the bad because they're your best friends for hire. So, take you on that journey to AWS and DevOps consulting. We're obviously more involved being your best friend all the time. Call us any night, all nights and hours of the day. So that's kind of how I break it down from a non-technical perspective. It's the doorman, the personal assistant, and the best friend for hire. So check it out. If you have any questions, do feel free to leave them in the chat room. We will be fielding them later. If I can't answer them myself, I know a couple of folks, aka my boss, is in the room and he can answer them for you as well. Oh, all right.
Interesting. I was gonna mention, were you guys hiring? I know last time you guys mentioned.
We're always looking for talent. I can't say we're hiring specifically for anything. I know we're always interested in cloud developers and DevOps engineers. But should you have a really cool resume, Miss Brianna, if you don't mind, she'll put her email in there. And if you can forward your resume to her, we'll be able to field it and take a look. If not, you can also reach out to me. I'll throw my LinkedIn page here in a little bit. And I do have a couple of folks I can definitely direct you to. Thank you for that. So yeah. Our DevOps consulting, managed services, and managed security. So this is kind of obviously the breakdown of everything. I'm not going to go into crazy detail of this, but pretty much we provide a holistic view of all your production and pretty much all your instances and everything that really comes into AWS. We will help you guide what could be the best decision and what may not be the right decision for you to work with. We are very versed in a lot of these tools. I may not seem like it, but we are, there's a lot that goes on, behind all the services with AWS. So to have somebody that knows what they're talking about does help with that. So, and that's kind of like the major one that we do very much enjoy is that DevOps, AWS consulting, pretty much bettering your development team. Not only for us to essentially do the work for you, but to guide you. It's kind of like the saying, teach a man to fish and he can feed himself all the time kind of thing. So that's the vibe that I get from that. So obviously, as Sarah showed, it's that whole, oh, actually, that's the managed services is, to have somebody focus and keep things running for you. We don't necessarily compete with other MSPs. We actually complement them. So you probably already have an MSP managed service provider as your provider for your business, or something that you work closely with. So for us, we're almost, an addition, a second set of eyes to that team, as well as alongside yours, working together closely with those MSPs to make sure that we can better provide value for you as a client. And for me, it took a little bit of time for me to understand, what's the difference between an MSP and us. MSPs can keep your, I guess, office network running, but for us, we keep your product running and going and not going down in AWS. An office network going down at 1 a.m. is definitely different than a product network going down in AWS at 1 a.m. And this is a slide that everybody's pretty familiar with, is that shared responsibility, and really making sure. Now, this is kind of the, doorman tier of our business, really just keeping an eye on everything for you. You probably have great teams working on your development and operations already. And then again, it's kind of just a second set of eyes for us to help you out there and make sure that, not only is your team compliant and continuing monitoring, we can also provide that 24/7 support as well. And yeah, just a little summary. We pretty much make sure that all those things that are running on your phone, your computer, are running and safe and secure on an infrastructure backend kind of side. We're not the ones that essentially make things pretty and make the buttons nice and, adding UI designs essentially, but we do help everything behind that. Pretty much the stuff that you see on screen is like the tip of the iceberg. We're everything below the water. So we can help you navigate what all that could be, and help you engage directly with your auditors and internal teams to achieve, maintaining compliance and focusing on building the best application. So your team could be developers and not maintainers, and have that kind of balance there. Now, there's a lot of words on here. Just look at the little highlighted ones, which do help. So for us, clients have been with us forever. I like to say forever, but over 5+ years. A lot of our clients have really been referrals. It's, my boss and our president have worked at other companies where those folks that we've worked with brought us on to their future businesses. And as you know, in the industry, it's not a crazy turnover, but when we do move on to better journeys and endeavors, it's always good to have people in your back pocket that you can trust and provide that support to you as you transition to a new business, or you see some problems that could that you've worked with before, and having a team like ours to help you kind of make that transition and help you. And that's essentially, for us, we definitely pride ourselves on the marriage of the relationship with our clients and not so much the wedding of it. So for us, it might come off a little abrasive at times, but we do want to make sure that our marriage is intact and that we can continue together and moving forward for a better value. Here are some of our clients, just a few. And for example, yes, we are AWS partners. However, if AWS isn't the right way to go, we will say that. We will take the initiative and give you a no bullshit answer and be able to navigate you either out of AWS into another platform or on-prem. For example, we helped one of our clients here, LexisNexis, in one of their departments, and navigate away from the cloud, and we were able to save them $1 million a year because we took one of their products out of AWS. Another client of ours is Care Journey, which is a healthcare analytics company. Huge sensitive data, as you all know who are in that field. Lots of compliances, lots of red tape to make sure we are covering that. But what we helped them with is we made sure every dollar worked like 100 for them, and we were able to help maintain their data warehouse and to a data lake, saving them $30,000 a month in savings. So lots of great opportunities out there, lots of great opportunities to have a second set of eyes take a look at what you're doing. All right, any questions so far? I know I'm kind of rambling here. Okay, see that? All right, so connect with us. Here's all of our information. Do take a look at our GitHub. It has some really great things in there. You can also follow us on LinkedIn. Again, I'll put my LinkedIn page in there. And Sarah went ahead and put those links in there as well. So do check us out. We have a great new newsletter with some awesome blogs and white papers that we can offer as well. And always looking forward to bringing up the community together and learning things together as everything always changes in Amazon. So thank you so much for this opportunity. Would it be all right, Sarah, that I roll right into raffles, the first set?
Yeah, go ahead. Great. Raffle away.
All right. So one really cool thing I just wanted to mention about why we do what we're doing is that, with COVID and everything, it's really hard to go out there and network and buy you guys beer and buy you guys, pizza for the night. So unfortunately, with everything at hand, we wanted to take this opportunity to at least sponsor and offer kind of the same value as well as many other networking events. So for our raffle, we have some really great raffles today. We'll be doing 3 of them, but the prize essentially will be at this value dollar, but the prize will be up to you to choose. What we wanted to make sure is that whatever you do choose for your prize and value, we definitely would like it to be to support our small businesses to get a gift card to an establishment that has less than 5 locations. So just think about it. I'm sure there's a really cool mom and pop shop in your backyard that you would love to support. That's who we want to support and be able to gift these gift cards to you all that are going to win to be able to support those small businesses. Should you not have anything to think of at that point, we are also offering any donations to any charity on your behalf. So we will be following up with everybody that is a winner. And be able to check it and see, what location, again, a small establishment of less than 5 locations and or a charity. So do keep that in mind. That is what is up for grabs right now. And there'll be different values. So the first one, I will stop sharing, but do take a note, sign up for our newsletter, check out us on LinkedIn. It's some really great content on there. Stop sharing. Okay, so first, I'm going to do a picture one, and this one is, I'm going to put a picture in the background and pull up your chat room. Whoever answers it first, that's the winner, and we'll be following up with you afterwards to see what you would like for your prize. So, for a prize of $10, this is the first picture I'm going to show on my virtual background. Whoever answers it first in the chat room gets it. So what is this item and what was it used for? Okay, so you can answer what it is and what it was used for. Whoever the first person was, that's going to be the winner, okay? Are we ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay. What is that? What is this thing? Yep, it is a stencil, but what is exactly a stencil for what? Okay, I have first winner. Now, Peter, can you tell me what was it used for? Peter Krizak?
We used to draw flowcharts with paper and pencil, and we use those to keep our shapes nice and sharp.
There you go. I hear it was used for programming when it was set in the beginning of your planning of coding.
Yeah.
That is right. You were the winner on that one. Thank you, Peter, for playing. That is the flowchart template used for programming to help coders back in the day. All right. Thank you so much for playing. And then we'll be marking you for the winner there.
Thank you.
No, thank you. And let me just make sure I notate your winning name here. All right, so I'm gonna go back to my regular virtual. All right, so the next one, and then we can get started with our wonderful speaker here today. Our next one is, all right, so once I answer the question, just wait, don't try to answer it when I'm answering or when I ask the question. What was Amazon first called? Nope, not AWS, Amazon, like Amazon.com. What was Amazon.com first called? I know you guys are putting S3 because I know that was the first service in Amazon Web Services. Well, keep going. I don't see any right answers yet. Ah, there you go. Winner, winner, chicken dinner. Ajit, thank you so much. You're the next winner there. It was called Cadabra. It was in lieu of abracadabra as a magical thing, and why they changed it because I think they were talking to a buyer or an investor, and they misheard and heard cadaver. So at that point, Jeff Bezos was like, oh, I should change that. And he stuck with Amazon because the original Amazon bookstore had a river-like A on it, and Amazon, you know, being one of the biggest rivers in the world, that's how it became Amazon. So that was actually a new thing I learned today too. So Ajit, you are our next winner. Thank you so much for playing. Do keep in mind for the prizes.
I was gonna mention, I really like that you get to learn something every single day, and there was another reason too.
Oh yeah, back then Jeff wanted it so that it started with either A, B, or C, because all of the search indexes were in alphabetical order, and he wanted it to be one of the first sites people came across when they were looking for something.
So
online.
back then everything was in alphabetical order. Jeff Bezos wanted it to be up at top.
Oh, okay, that's cool. That's cool. And that question, Ajit, was actually for $15. So Peter, you got 10 in the bank. Ajit, you got 15 in the bank. And there's really no rules if you want to win another one. So, but thank you for playing. We'll move on to our wonderful speaker, Rafael. Let's see.
All right, I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Okay, give me just a second. Good to see you, my friend. Let me just make you able to share that. I'm going to make you a co-host so that you're able to share.
Okay.
Awesome. Go ahead, Sarah. All yours.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Christine and Sarah, for having me here and let me talk. Let me see. Share. Let me see. I'm gonna share my screen right quick here. Can you guys see anything?
I do not
yet.
see anything, Rafael.
Nothing yet?
Mm-mm.
Okay. Share. How about now?
There
Yes.
you
Oh, okay, cool. All right. So yeah, before I start with this presentation, I'm actually going to give you a quick demo just to put things in context. And so the topic of the presentation is about hardening Kubernetes deployment, right? So basically, what we're going to do is I'm going to show you a vulnerable application that I built myself, which I'm very proud of. I'm so good at writing broken code. So I'm going to show you that application, and I can show you how we can abuse that application. And then at the end of the presentation, I will show you a second demo with the same, exactly same application, okay, but deployed with certain security settings in place. So this is Minikube. I'm assuming everybody here is familiar with Kubernetes, at least they hear about it. So this is my Minikube, which is local Kubernetes cluster, one node cluster, and I have two applications deployed. I call nodes v1 and nodes v2. Nodes v1 is what I'm going to show you right now, okay, which is this guy here. Application is pretty simple. It's an application to take nodes, okay. There is no database behind the scene or anything like that. So the nodes that I created basically are saved in this in the file system as a regular text file, right? So if I can do demo, this is a demo node, and I create my nodes. Then I can come here and list my nodes. I can see my nodes here. I can see the name of the node. I can see, the size and the date, the timestamp, I guess. If I click on the node, I can see the content of the node. Okay. Now this application has some, like I mentioned some vulnerabilities, right? One of the problems the application has is that, it uses a cookie to set the path where my nodes are being saved in the system. So when I click here and list nodes, I'm seeing the directory looks like of this nodes directory. So what happens if I can change D to /etc, for instance, right? And I do this again. Now I'm seeing the content of the directory, the /etc content of this container, which is a path traversal vulnerability. The same way I can click on a node and see my own node, the content of my own nodes, I can click also in any of these files, and I can see the content of this file. For instance, I need to change the cookie back again to etc, so the application look into that directory. If I click on the resolve.conf, many as you know, maybe this is the file where the system, Linux or Unix systems in this case, keep the DNS information, right? So I can see the content for any files in there. Also, I could potentially create a file with a existing name, okay? And I can actually set whatever I want. In other words, I can override the content of a file. So I can do server, server name server here, and I can change my path here to /etc. And if I do create here now, and go back to list my nodes, and I change the path to /etc again nodes. If I open again this file, we'll see that we just overrode the content of this file. And like that, just think about what you can do in a system where you can manipulate files that actually belong to the system. Like in this case, DNS name, right? I can put here a DNS server that is malicious. So any request that your container might do that it needs a DNS resolution, you're gonna send those requests to a server that I own, and I can direct you or redirect you to malicious websites and things like that. But also, looks like the developer, and this is not very uncommon actually, also left an endpoint where you can actually do some debugging, right? Maybe something the developer put in place to help him to make sure or verify that the application is behaving as expected. So in this case, look at the bug, receive some parameters, in this case -L, which is an argument that is passed to the ls command. And basically here you can see that we can see the ls -L output of running that command in the container. Now, because in Linux, we can concatenate commands with the semicolon. So if we come up here and encode the semicolon character as %3b, and then do, for instance, ID, we will run the ID command. It will tell me that, okay, this application actually is running as root, okay? We can see here. And so not only that, but I could potentially also download things from the internet. For instance, I just copy and paste here because it's a little longer. I just did a wget command, -O, basically. I just download the first or the index page of the google.com, right? So you can see here the exit or the output of that command, and you can see how it generates a file called output.txt that contains basically the index page of google.com. And because this is actually also deployed in Kubernetes, I could potentially do something like this, and I explain this what this is later. But in Kubernetes, every pod is deployed with a. Whoops, I think I messed that up. Let me refresh the page right quick here. Let me get back to my cookies. Let me go back to my. Oh, something I messed up here. I don't know what it is. So I was going to show you, this is the problem I was doing demos live. This is not up and running here. There we go, it's there. I don't know why that happened. So basically, what I'm going to show you here is to how we can exfiltrate a file that contains the token of so it contains the token of a service account. So if I do this here, okay,
Hey,
it's getting,
hey, Rafael.
yeah.
So Steve Radich mentioned something, or he had a question about. I'd be curious how many are Windows background and no idea what resolve.conf/etc. are, etc. If a lot, we might like maybe you might want to slow down, I think is what he's asking.
Oh, okay.
And then he's mentioning, I think to others, like if this was Windows, it would be like having admin rights and changing DNS. By changing DNS server, you could proxy and intersect any data. And then it's harder than that, but it's basically the gist of what he's trying to convey.
Right. I don't know why this is actually not coming up here. I might have missed something here. But anyway, so I just want to show you too that there you go here now. I think we are now in a better place. So if I come back.
So Steve was just mentioning that he was just trying to explain to others who might be from like a Windows background or PowerShell. And Pankaj had a question of if external account is available, can it connect to AWS metadata URI or URL and fetch the metadata?
Say, what is the question again?
Pankaj, do you want to ask it? I think I might be reading it wrong.
Oh, sure. Thank you, Sarah. So, when you were exploiting the vulnerability and trying to connect to Google.com, my question was basically on that time that if you can connect to AWS metadata, if this is in the EKS or using something else,
Yeah, basically what I was trying to show is that you could potentially connect to a service out of your cluster, right? If there is no restriction, which usually it depends how you set up your cluster. You might or might not have access to out of your cluster. Or sometimes you have access through DNS servers, which that's what I show you the DNS, how you can change the DNS on your cluster, and a way that usually attackers exfiltrate information today is what is called through basically DNS tunneling. And so yeah, as long as you have some way to get out your cluster, you could potentially reach out to Google, some metadata. If there's anything you can query from a service that you can reach out to, yeah, you can always get that information. Problem with this is you could potentially download a malicious, let's say, some piece of malware that you can put, so you can create what is called persistence, right? So tomorrow I can connect to those servers without having to exploit your application again, because I already opened a back door. So in a way, I can go in and out every time I need it.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah. Thank you. So this is what I was going to show you. I'm gonna talk about this token a little bit later, but because this is deployed in AWS, I'm sorry, in a Kubernetes cluster, this is a token that you could also exfiltrate if you have access to it, and we'll see more information about that in a moment. All right, so let me go to the presentation now. Okay, so today, like I say, I'm going to talk about handling the Kubernetes deployments. Okay, we're going to see. We just saw a vulnerable application, and at the end, we'll see how this exactly same application deployed in slightly differently. We can constrain or restrain bad actors. The idea here is that is somebody that compromised our application, is to make sure that this person cannot do much inside our network. it cannot do lateral movements, like scanning your network around and jumping around your servers, cannot create persistence, like we just mentioned before, and cannot exfiltrate data that is no application data. And then we'll go through that. So yeah, my name is Rafael Troncoso. I'm currently a security champion software engineer in SAP Concur specifically. And before that, well, since 1998 until 2018 that I moved to SAP, I've been working for different government agencies, US Navy, FDA, and USCIS. And like Sarah mentioned before, this is my opinion, and this is I'm not here representing SAP at all, although I use SAP templates for my slides. So hopefully they will give me a bonus for giving them some publicity. All right, so Kubernetes, okay, is about running containers for the most part. We have today, projects like KubeVirt, where allows you to run VMs inside a Kubernetes cluster. But initially, and the core, the foundation of Kubernetes is to run containers. And a container is based on an image, right? So what do we need to think about when we create the image for our containers? Okay, supply chain is being in the news lately. The reason we run out of toilet paper with this pandemic, it was a supply chain issue, right? And this can, translate to anything in life, right? That we need to, that needs supply. Software is nothing different, right? So we need to make sure that we know that we're using a trusted image, that we're putting this image for our container from a trusted source. We need to make sure that the image is being scanned with the proper tools. And from the security point of view, the smaller the image it is, the less things, the less resources an attacker will have to its disposition to abuse it, right? If I compromise an application that has, or a container that has a full-blown, operating system, well, I have all the tools to move laterally. I could probably install packages. If you create your image base, let's say in Ubuntu Alpine. Alpine is one of the favorite images for developers because it's small, right? It's kind of fast, it's small, doesn't take too much time to download and to move around. But still, small, but you still are deploying an operating system, and you can still install packages if you are able to compromise your application and get a shell inside or a remote code execution inside your container. So make sure that and then also make sure you follow good practices, right? There are plenty of good practices out there. Docker itself has a page with a bunch of good practices when you create images. So now, not every time you can go with the smallest image and image with certain settings or parameters or things like that, because you might be constrained by some policies or some compliance issues, right? You might have an application probably that it could be built using certain tools that those tools only provide support for, let's say, a Red Hat operating system. So you cannot run that image or that container using an Alpine image because it's an issue. You're not going to get support right from the vendor, or maybe you need to follow some DoD or government compliance requirements. When I used to work for DHS, the Red Hat was the only option that we could use then for our container. We couldn't use Alpine, we couldn't use things like distroless because they weren't approved, right? So use what you can, but just make sure that you are pulling those images from trusted sources, those images as can, and they're being approved by hopefully a security team or somebody in your company. Now, what I just showed you here, it's an application deployed, it's written in Go, okay, and it's using this Docker Docker file. So it's a multi-stage Docker file here. Nothing special. It's just go. It compiles all the stuff in here, and then I use an Alpine image, okay, where I copy the application I just compiled, and basically, cmd /app, and then that's gonna be run when I bring out my container, right? So there are all things, well, at least few things wrong with this. As you all know, in Docker, if you do not specify anything else, your application will be run as root, which is in security is a bad practice, right? Nothing should be running as root, or nothing as less as possible. As we saw when I show you the RSC, the remote command execution with the ID, we saw that the image or that container was running as root application. So if we compromise that container, we have root inside the container. You might think, well, but you're in a Docker container and you can escape that. Well, last year, actually, Docker, the engine had a vulnerability that if you were running a container as root, you could escape and end up having root privileges in the host. That was fixed, but if you weren't running that container as root, you couldn't exploit that vulnerability. So a security recommendation, you don't run anything as root as long as you can. So how we can improve this Docker file? So this is an example that I'll be using for the second version of the application that I showed you at the end. This is the new Docker file I'll be using, right? Still, I'm using a Golang image to build to compile my application. But now the first important change here is that I'm adding a group and a user. In this case, the 1,000, a group called APP-GRP or application group, and the user called application user. The user. And then another big change that I'm doing here is that instead of using Alpine, I'm gonna use a distro-based image. For those of you who are not familiar with distro, this is a Google project where those images contain pretty much nothing but the runtime libraries that you need to run your application. In this case, the base image, it just contains the libc. It allows you to run, in this case, Go application. As you know, Go, when you compile, it compiles to native code. So it's not like Java that you need the JVM, or Python that you need the Python interpreter, or Node.js, you need the, JavaScript, you need Node.js and that kind of stuff. So basically, this image is going to contain only libc and some certificate and OpenSSL libraries for HTTPS thing that you need to do. Now, because this distroless image doesn't have anything in there, you cannot copy files inside your image and then change the permission of the file. Like you can see many times people using, run chmod something, or ch group something, or like in this case, right? This run chown app user, what I'm giving the permission or making the app user the owner of /node directory. You cannot do that in this distros image, because when you do a run, basically you are running that command inside the image. In this case, you can do it because the Golang image has a shell in the image, and it has the chown command. Now in the distroless, you don't have that. So if you try to run this exact command on the distroless image, it will fail because there is no chown command there. So you have to make sure when you copy your files over your final image here, you need to make sure that you set the proper permission right away. So that's something you need to keep in mind. And the last thing we do here is, like, at the end, we are going to specify the user in Docker. The last user that you specify in your Docker file will be the user that will run the application. So when I spin up this container, the process that runs that container is going to be owned by the user, in this case 1000, which is the user we just added previously, which is the app user. You can actually use the name of the user instead of the ID, but we'll see later that Kubernetes actually requires that if you specify the user, it requires that you put the ID in there. Otherwise, it will complain. I see some stuff popping up in the chat, but I'm not following the chat, Sarah. If there is any question that you want to ask, just let me know. Okay.
Yeah. There's only one question so far, which is that's hard to believe they would default to have admin/root access in Docker. Can you help me understand the link between Docker and Kubernetes?
Yeah, so Docker and Kubernetes, and I have a bullet point about this at the end. So they actually, so security and convenience are usually in both, in the opposite extremes of the balance, right? The more security you put in play, the less convenience to use the system. The most convenience, the less security you put in there. So Docker and Kubernetes are more, and nothing wrong with that. They're more like making things easy to use for developers than secure. Okay, so that's why it's very important for developers today to have certain knowledge about security, and especially when they deploy the stuff and they need to know what they are deploying and how to deploy. This is where this all DevSecOps and DevOps thing come into play, right? When security is integrated in all the life cycle of the development process. And but yeah, that's the reason for Docker and Kubernetes. They're both very friendly and easy to use, and right away everything works. It's kind of like, I don't know if this is the best analogy, but it's kind of like Windows like 15 years ago. You spin up a Windows, everything works, but everything was very, quote unquote, vulnerable. Not very vulnerable, but easier to exploit. And a Linux on the other side, a Linux system, everything was locked down. So nothing worked unless you start opening things, right? So kind of a similar analogy there. So, and the relationship between Docker and Kubernetes, Kubernetes is a container orchestrator. So like I say, a Kubernetes, the main purpose of Kubernetes is to run containers. And it happens to be that Docker today is the most popular container engine. There are other options up there like Cry.io, Rocket, different container technologies. And you can actually run those kind of containers in Kubernetes and not necessarily Docker. But today, by default, Kubernetes out of the box is, supports Docker, and it's what most of the people are using at this point. But in the future, I believe Cry.io is going to take a good chunk of the market in the container world, especially when you deploy them in Kubernetes or in production. Now, on the developer side, I think Docker is going to stay here for a while. Okay, it works really well. It is a very good tool, very good technology. Did I answer the question, or?
Okay. Was that okay? Did that make sense, Mark? Okay, I'm gonna assume that it's okay. You can go ahead.
Okay, thanks.
If there's anything else in the chat.
Okay, perfect. All right, so well, we saw the image, the base image, right? The importance of the base image that you're gonna for your container. Now we're gonna focus on some of the security settings that you can set on your deployment manifesto or deployment files for Kubernetes that will help us to improve the security of our deployments, right? And this is called the POS security context. Not confuse this with the POS security policies. Okay, POS security policies is related somehow, but a POS security policies is something that is some policies you can deploy in the cluster that to say, for instance, okay, I'm not going to allow that anybody deploying this cluster a pod running as root, things like that, right? So this security context is more about your deployment, and it's kind of like related with the security policies, but it's nothing to do with security policies. This is independent from the cluster. It's just for your own deployment. So before going into that, let me actually give you a quick review of how the access control to Kubernetes works. So the first time when you try to access to a Kubernetes cluster and try to, let's say, create a pod, right? first thing is you need to do is part your authentication. Usually in Kubernetes, the authentication is done through a third-party service like OpenID or things like that. So once Kubernetes authenticates you and they're like, okay, you are good to go, you have access to the cluster, the next thing that happens is authorization. Authorization is actually today, for the most part, it's being implemented using RBAC or role-based authorization control. Here is where Kubernetes say, okay, user A wants to create a pod in namespace C, right? Can this user do that? If it can do that, well, I'll let you do it. If you cannot do that, then it will reject the request. But there is a third step, which is an admission control. Now, once you have been authenticated and you have been authorized, then the next thing is like, okay, this person say he won't create a pod in this namespace. Is there anything in my cluster that allows that to happen or not? Like I mentioned before, you can have a policy, right? A security policy in your cluster that you can say, well, nobody, I'm not going to accept any pod that runs as root, period. So if this user is trying to create a pod as root, then that request will be rejected, right, by an admission control. Actually, there is an admission controller called PSP or pod security policy. And if you are allowed to do whatever you want to do, there is no policy in the cluster or nothing in the cluster that will, object against that, then you're good to go and you can create what you want to do, or you can, your request will be fulfilled. Okay, this is a very high overview of how access control Kubernetes API works, right? 3 steps: authentication, authorization, and admission control. So on the security context part, I'm going to talk about these 5 bullet points here. So I'm going to move on the first one, which is privilege mode. So in Kubernetes, by default, when you run a pod, it will run as non-privileged. Now, that doesn't mean that an admin, for whatever reason, want to change the defaults and say, hey, well, I'm going to allow, by default, any pod that runs here is going to run with privilege mode. What that means is basically you give to this container, if you run a container as privileged, you will give him practically access to your host. You could potentially mount your file system in your host inside the container, make modification, as you can see in this screenshot down here. Basically, you bypasses the C groups. C groups, for just quick review on that, Docker containers are built on top of C groups and namespaces, 2 different functionalities of the Linux kernel. So C groups basically what allows you is to put certain limits on resources for the container. Okay, so basically, if you run a container as privileged, then you practically are bypassing the C groups constraints there. Now, like I said, by default, all the containers are run as non-privileged. So you don't have to specify privilege equal false or colon false in your deployment manifesto. But if you put it and somebody else, an admin go and change the setting, you make sure that your deployment, your pod, it will be deployed as non-privileged. So you make sure that if you put that in your manifesto, that would be a recommendation, basically, a good practice to do. I hear some noise. I don't know if somebody has a question. No? Okay, move on. All right, the second thing I'm going to show you here is how to run a pod as a non-root. Now, there are 3 ways you can specify this in Docker. The first way is you specify your user in your Docker file, as we saw. You run that container in a pod, and that container, so Kubernetes will honor that user that you put in your Docker file without having you to specify anything else, right? Now, the problem with that is that if somebody comes and changed your Docker file and made a mistake, instead of user 1000, it puts a 10,000, right? What happened with that container? So what happened is that when you run your pod, it will honor the user ID 10,000, as you can see here. But because the user ID 10,000 does not exist in your container, on your Docker image, then the group would be root. So it's going to give you a false sense of security, like, oh, my container is not running as root. Well, yes and no, half of it, because you having the, belonging to the root group, you could do things that you are not supposed to do. So one of the things that you can do here is to set the run as non-root in your Kubernetes cluster. So if you set that in your manifesto, okay, as you can see in this example here, and you do not specify a user in the Docker file, then Kubernetes will reject the deployment of your pod. It will tell you, hey, I can't find the user, so I cannot run the user, this pod as root. If you put user 0, which is the root ID, the ID for the root user, it will complain the same way. If you don't put a number, if you put the username instead of a number, then Kubernetes again will complain. It's looking for the ID. That's what I told you at the beginning, that in the Docker file, the user has to be with the ID, the number. Otherwise, Kubernetes will complain if you put this clause, okay, run as non-root. But again, you have this problem. If you put a wrong user ID, then you can end up in this situation, right? Where the user ID is honored, but the group ID, because there is no one related to this user ID, then you will be in the group of the roots. Now, another thing you can do, another option that you have, is to use the run as user or run as group. Here, what you will do is when you put this in your manifesto, in your deployment file, YAML file, you can specify the user ID that you want to run your pod. Now, if you only specify the user ID, and for whatever reason this user ID does not exist in your Docker image, you will end up in the same situation as before, right? You will be, you will be running the container with the user that you specify, 406 in this case, but because the user doesn't exist, then you will end up in the root group. So how can I make sure that I'm running my container with the right ID and the right group? Then you will have to specify both, the run as user 1000 or whatever number it is, and run as group. If this user ID does not exist, Kubernetes still will honor these two numbers. Basically, your user ID will be 1000 and your group will be 1000 as well. You will not end up being in the root group anymore. Okay, so my recommendation, always set both. That way, if somebody change our Docker image and it changed the ID of the user that it creates or something like that, it won't mess up your deployment. It could mess up your deployment. You might end up having some kind of forbidden permission because the user ID doesn't have access to certain files in the container. But to me, that's better than having the false sense of security that, oh no, yeah, my container is not running as root, but in reality, it is kind of running as root, right? Okay, so there is another thing in Kubernetes that is to avoid a process to escalate privileges. So what is a privilege escalation? It's basically when you're trying to do something, for instance, with sudo, or when you have a binary with a set UID set, and so when you run this binary, it's run with somebody else's privileges. This is common again in Linux. I don't know if there is something like this in Windows, but basically Docker or Kubernetes allows you, this is actually inherited from Docker, so allows you to say, okay, once you start this process that running my container with these privileges, that's all you get. Okay, that's all you get. You cannot get anything else. You can, if you do a sudo something, it won't elevate privileges for that particular command. It won't work. Now, if you run your container in a privileged mode, as we saw previously, or with this capability, we're gonna see what capabilities are in the next slide, then this allow privilege escalation will be always true, okay? But if you don't run your container with any of those two things, then you can set, you should set this as privilege as false. That way you cannot gain any more privileges that you had.
Hey, Rafael, and I'm not sure if this answers Dapo's question. He asked, what happens when some of the containers require elevated privileges?
Well, if you require elevated privileges, then if you need them, you need them. My thing is, if you need elevated privileges, ask twice why, and try to see if you can do something to avoid them. I had this situation where we had to run a Apache container, right? Apache need to listen on port 80 by default, or it had to listen on port 80 anyways. So if you try to run Apache on a Docker container with non-root user, it won't work, because you cannot, with the non-root user, you cannot open a port under 1024, right? 1024. So port 80, you cannot open as non-user. Now, what can you do about that? And I'm gonna actually go to the next slide because it's related to the next thing here. Not this one, actually. This one, I'm gonna go back to that one there. Capabilities. So in Docker, you can tell, hey, I want to run Apache as non-root, and I know I cannot open port 80 because I'm not root, right? And that's a privileged port. But I'm gonna add the capability that allows me to do that. And there is a capability called, I think, net bind or something like that, that will allow you to do that. So instead of compromising the whole container and running with the elevated privileges, if you just give these elevated privileges to a binary, specifically binary, like in this case, the Apache binary, and I'd rather do that than they say, oh, well, if it needs privileges, I'm just gonna run it as root. And if I compromise Apache, well, I'm gonna compromise, I'm gonna have a root access into the container, and hopefully I can escape from there, but you never know, right? So that's my my opinion on that. Think twice before you give up, right? Like, okay, this is, why do I need elevated privileges here? What can I do? What changes can I make in my architecture or my structure of my container to don't need to have elevated privileges? Sometimes you have no option, okay? But many times you have the option to make changes and to avoid that. So now that I'm in here in the capabilities slide, so capabilities actually are it's again functionality that is implemented inside the Linux kernel. Back in the day, a long time ago in Linux, basically you could run processes as privileged or non-privileged. That's it. So capabilities came as a need of having a finer way to specific what you can do and not can do. Basically, give permissions to a process. Right. I put a link here in case you're interested in capabilities. But the idea is, like, in Linux, you have a bunch of different capabilities that you can specifically say, okay, I want this process to allow them to bind a privileged port, or I want this process to be able to change permissions of a file. So you can go to that level of granularity to allow or don't allow things to do in certain processes. Like, in fact, if you see this the screenshot here on the left, I'm actually dropping all my capabilities. Okay, you have this inside the security content, you have the capability section here, and you have drop, and you also have add here. We'll see in the next one. But the drop, you can say, okay, I'm gonna drop all capabilities. Event running my container as root. As you can see here, this is a container that I run with no capabilities, and I didn't change the user ID. So basically it's running as root. And I try to ping myself as root. This is what I get, permission denied. Why? Because I drop everything that the root in this case can do. Not even root can do that. Now, if you have root, you might be able to change the capabilities in the system. But my point is that even being root, if you drop all capabilities, you will, won't be able to do anything. On the right side here, you can see the same example where I drop all the capabilities, but now I'm gonna say, hey, but I won't actually allow to do network draw packages, basically, which is what you need to do, for instance, a ping, right? So same example, I just add this as capability, net row, and then again, same thing, same case scenario, being root. Now, if I do ping to myself, I can do the ping because I add this capability. The second link here, it's the list of capabilities that Docker support by default. I think there are like 9 or 10 capabilities that Docker inherit. So any container that you run, it comes with certain capabilities already associated to it without having you to do anything. Now there is the list of capabilities is longer than that, and you can add or remove some of those capabilities.
Hey, Rafael.
Again, yes.
Sorry. Someone asked, is security context per process or entire container? I know Dapple responded, but
yeah, good question. So security context can be specified at the pod level or container level. As you know, in a pod, you can run more than one container. So if you have a security context defined at the pod level, all the containers will inherit that settings. If you have a security context at pod level, and there is a security context with certain setting that conflicts at container level, then the container level wins. And so, for instance, if you have a pod where you say security concept run as non-root, for instance, right? And then you have a container inside your pod. Let's say you have 2 containers. Container A doesn't have any security context set. Container B says, well, I'm going to allow this container runs as root. Then when you run the pod, container A will run as non-root as specified in the security context for the pod, but container B will override that setting and it will run the container as root. So you can 2 levels, pod level and container level, and container takes preference over the pod level.
Thanks. And then I was just going to mention, everyone, I dropped the links in the chat.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let's go actually one slide back because I jumped it. So the other thing, very interesting thing you can do too, and again, this is inherited from Docker, is to mount your file system as read-only. So what do you gain with this? So if you do not have to write stuff in your file system, just why do you want to allow to any process write in it, right? As we saw in the demo at the beginning, because I could compromise, I was able to override the contents of certain files, is because number one, I have permission to access to that file, and number two, the system was read and write, right? So if you do not have to write in your container file system, which is a good thing not to do that, then just mount the file system as read-only. Now, if you have to, like in this case, like I mentioned at the beginning, there's no database behind this application and the files were written in the file system, then you can actually create a volume, okay? And say, hey, I'm gonna create a volume, in this case, an empty there, but it's basically it's an empty volume there. I'm gonna mount under my, /nodes, where is the directory where I'm gonna write my nodes. But the rest of the system just through read-only. So all I can do if I compromise this container is to write things under the /nodes directory, but I wouldn't be able to override or make changes in the files under the /etc directory as I showed you before, right? So this is a very good setting again to put in place in your deployments to keep your containers immutable, right? But at the end of the day, that's one of the biggest properties that Docker provides or pursue, right? Immutability, and this is where the cattle and pets concept comes, where cattle, your container has a problem, kill it and put a new one. Don't fix it. Don't do anything with it, right? Just kill it and create a new one. That's the whole point there. All right, we saw capabilities here. And there are more things you can set in your security context. You can play with the access control to certain files. If you are in a Red Hat a cluster with, you can use SELinux. SELinux is that thing that everybody that use Red Hat disable, which is like is a security platform that allows you to control very nicely a lot of the permissions in your system. In the Debian flavor operating systems, it's called AppArmor, pretty much kind of the same thing as Linux. And seccom, where you can tell Linux, again, seccom is something from the Linux kernel where you can tell Linux, hey, don't allow this process to make like syscalls or things like that. So there are more things you can do in the context, right? So here, let's list some of them, but I'm not going to get into more details on that. Is there any other question on this topic? I'm going to move on to a different thing.
I know Christopher, I think it was Peter. He asked, does it make /TMP read only too?
/TMP read only too? Not necessarily, unless you, so one of the volumes you can mount in Kubernetes is a TMPFS, I guess Docker, which is actually a read-only volume, and that is in memory. Also a volume, like I show you the MTD volume, in Kubernetes, you can pass a extra parameter here that is, what is it? It's a mode read-only or something like that. I can't remember what it is. And you could mount the volume as read-only, yeah. But by default, when you run a container, the file system is writable. Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Yep. Okay. So service account in Kubernetes, when you run a pod by default is associated to a service account called default, okay, that exists in every namespace in the cluster. You can override that service account if you want. You can specify your own service account in your pod definition. But if you do not, then Kubernetes uses this default service account to run, well, not to run, but associate that service account credentials in your pod. And this is what we saw at the beginning when I was having some trouble, actually. But basically, the token that I showed you at the beginning, it is a job token. Okay, this job token is the credentials associated to the default service account in the namespace where your pod is deployed. So by default, a service account in Kubernetes doesn't have any permission. You cannot do anything with it, okay? But doesn't mean that somebody can give some permission to the service account. In fact, I have seen people making changes and put these default service accounts in an admin group. So basically this default service account has admin access in your namespace. So that token, if I get that token in my hands, I could make calls to the cluster. Like you can see the curl command here, passing that token as in the authorization header, right, as a bidder token here. This is for some of you or all of you, I don't know, who are familiar with HTTP web services or REST APIs and this kind of stuff is common, right? Job token passing as an authorization header. This is what this token is all about, right? It will give you access to the cluster, and then it depends what you can do. It depends on what permissions this token has associated with it. So again, by default, without you telling anything to Kubernetes, it always mount this token inside your container. The only reason you might need this token is that your pod or your container your pod needs to talk to the Kubernetes API to do things inside the Kubernetes cluster. It doesn't mean that, oh, I need to mount a secret or a config map in my pod So I need a token. No, you don't need a token if you mount your stuff in your definition, your deployment definition. If you programmatically want to make calls to the Kubernetes API and do things with it, then you will need this token as an authorization / authentication credential to do what you need to do. Like you might want to create on the fly, a secret or modify a config map or whatever you're doing, which is for the most part not the case of a regular web application, right? So in the 90% of the cases, I will say you do not need this token. So in Kubernetes, you had the option with this auto mount service account token to tell Kubernetes, hey, do not mount this token in my container, okay? So if you set this attribute to false, then Kubernetes will not mount this token into your container. And again, if you don't need a token, if you don't need something in your container, don't put it in there because you take the risk that somebody can steal it, okay?
Hey, Rafael.
So, yes.
I was gonna mention, someone had a question in the comments. Will this token be in the kube config file? And then I was wondering, how much longer? Just because we're right on short on time.
Okay, well, I'm gonna hurry up then. Sorry, I talked too much here. Yeah, this is you can actually put this token in your config kube config file. Yes, you could. You could potentially put it there and use it. You can use this token to access to your Kubernetes API. Yeah. All right. So let's move on. Network policies. I'm gonna move quick on here. So in Kubernetes, there are 4 kind of networks, sort of pick, and so there are, according to the documentation, Kubernetes needs to solve 4 different, network problems here. Communication between containers, communication between pods, service to pod, and external to service, external access to service. We're gonna focus on the second one, pod to pod. And according to the documentation, I'm just gonna leave it here. And I'm gonna read the last one here in yellow. By default, every pod can talk to every pod in the cluster, no matter what the pod is deployed, no matter what namespace you are. I'm in namespace A, you are namespace B, I can talk to your pods. Inside from my pods, can talk to your pods, can talk to the pods in the kube system namespace, okay? So this is a problem. For that, Kubernetes provide what is called network policies. Network policy is something is namespaced, and basically it kind of acts as a firewall, but it's not a firewall. You can control the ingress, incoming traffic, and egress, outgoing traffic from your pods, right? So you can say, hey, I only want to my pod only being accessed by this pod in a certain namespace, or this IP, or, it's all based actually on labels, basically. As you know, labels in Kubernetes is a very simple concept, but very powerful and very important. So having good labels and defined for your objects is crucial, especially when you come to network policies here. Now,
Hey,
the network policy, yes.
Sorry to interrupt. We're actually a little bit over the time now, and into the break and into the second presenter's talk. Would it be okay with you if we get through some questions, and if it's okay with you to resume afterwards?
Okay, sure.
Because I wanna be respectful to all the presenters here. Were there any questions right now? I know Petras Scoto, I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name. You asked, so you can use the JWT token within your app. Oh, just kidding. Okay, he said it's all good. Are there any other questions? Feel free to unmute yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And if not, we can dive into the break. Okay, everyone's having a good time. Thank you, Steve.
All right.
Okay, then in that note, we're going to take a quick 2 to 3 minute break while the sponsors set up the raffle. So if you want, we can go, come back to this after the second presentation. But Christina, or I'm not sure if Brianna, if you were gonna do it, if you want to set up the I forgot the name of the
Kahoot.
Kahoot, yes. Yeah, so you can go ahead and share. And in the meantime, we'll have a short 2-minute break if people want to get some water, use the bathroom real quick. And then in 2 minutes, we'll start the raffle. And in about, 7 to 8 minutes, we'll kind of get back on track.
Okay.
Around 7:30.
Sounds good.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Two. Can we see that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Kahoot, right? The full screen?
Yep.
Okay, good. Okay, so for this raffle, you're actually going to be playing on your phone. We're going to have a couple questions. So you're going to go to www.kahoot.it, and then you're going to plug in that game pin to get this game. I'll give you guys a couple minutes here to all log in and make sure you have a chance to get this raffle. This is like our grand prize winning raffle here, so make sure you get in on this one.
Yep, we have a first, second, and third winner. So it'll be 25, 15, and 10.
And then each question is going to be about like 20 seconds.
There you go. There you go. Foo bar. And when you do win, we will have to reach out to you and find out who you were as the winner. So try to put your actual name in there. And as far as for Rafael, do keep your questions coming for him. I understand that we'll be going back to his presentation afterwards. Not after this, later on tonight.
Keep it open a little longer.
Ooh, got a lot of players today. All right. Okay. Last call. It's 23 players.
That was the last call, Mark. All right. No one else? Oh.
Yeah, one more. One more.
Yeah. Oh, someone dropped out. Okay, here we go. I'm going to start. Can you see the button? All right. Okay.
Oh, all right. Mike, Ashish, Diego.
Here we go. First, second, third.
I'm missing the amazing Kahoot music.
I didn't know they had Kahoot music.
No, I'm just kidding. It's like elevator music, but much louder.
Hurry. Hopefully if that 20 seconds isn't too fast. Okay.
This one's a tough one.
Wow, good job. I like that it moves people up and down. Okay. Nice. All right. Where we at? Oh, someone's on fire. Okay. Last one. Oh.
Good luck, good luck.
Woo.
There you go. That was an easy.
Everyone killed it.
Yeah. All right. The podium.
Oh, Diego.
Oh. Okay, let me just jot these down.
And as a reminder, we are gifting your prizes in lieu of a small medium business with 5 establishments or less, or a charity of your choice. And Brianna will be reaching out to you either through the chat, or if you are a winner, just let us know. If that's
Yep.
something you have in the chat room.
Yeah, if you want, I'll shoot you a message, but if you want to beat me to it and just privately message Brianna McAuliffe your email so I know, and then that'll be it, and I'll get you your raffle.
Awesome. Okay, so that was cool. I hope everyone got to test their skills. And see that. I'm gonna wait about 1 more minute to go ahead and start. That way we can wait on some folks who might have just stepped out for the break. And I hope everyone learned something. I definitely did. And whoever that Jeff Bezos was, oh, who knows? Okay. I'm gonna be sharing, just while we wait here, the link for the YouTube channel where we're gonna be posting the information, and I'll be posting that in the chat. But I'll go ahead and turn it over if you'd like now. And we can get Cris Daniluk. Sorry if I butchered it.
I'll pronounce it correct.
Oh, okay. Awesome. And we can go ahead and get started then. Cool. Glad to have you.
All right, you guys see my PowerPoint okay?
Yep.
Very important question before we get started. Can you also see this window?
Yes.
The code. Cool. All right, I'm planning on bouncing back and forth between. But before I do, just to get started and set some context, today I want to talk about how to use Terraform to automate security monitoring in AWS. This is sort of the talk that I wish I had been able to find and attend 3 or so years ago. I find that a lot of the automation talks get carried away in the really cool stuff you can do and forget the really important stuff you need to do. So this is the talk for what, in my opinion, you should be doing. So my goal for this talk is to teach every one of you how to up your game on AWS security monitoring. I'm going to go through a couple of key products. So CloudTrail, everybody says turn it on. Nobody ever tells you what to do with it once you turn it on. GuardDuty, kind of similar. AWS basically says turn it on and we'll start charging you more money, but it's really important. What do you do with it? Security Hub is a pretty new thing that I don't think a lot of people are using yet, and it's pretty powerful. And then CloudWatch Logs is what brings it all home. So I'm going to walk each of you through that. Late edition, AWS config as well. But I'm not going to talk about using Lambdas to automatically remediate issues. So for those of you who don't know what that means, most of the AWS talks that I've seen, not just from AWS, but from anyone, really likes to focus on automatically detecting that somebody did something they shouldn't have and then taking action automatically. Somebody created a security group that they shouldn't have created, and you build a function that comes in and deletes it automatically. If you aren't doing the first 5 things on this list really, really well, you should not be messing around with automatic remediation. That is for people who have refined the security model that they have and are looking to optimize. But for most of us, we need to do the basics and we need to do them well, and anything else is a bonus. So to get started, I'm not sure how familiar everybody is with Terraform, and I wanted to just set a little baseline. So Terraform is a infrastructure as code platform, and what that means is that rather than buying servers and plugging cables into them and putting a CD in and installing an operating system, or in AWS logging into a console and clicking give me a server, clicking what network it should be on, what security groups it should have, that we do that all in code. And the advantage of that is that we know exactly what we did. So if we are always in code and we start making changes and something stops working, we know how to go back to what we just did. There's a learning curve, and a lot of people don't want to take that learning curve because they think it slows you down. But the truth is that when you get rolling with infrastructure as code, it becomes so much embedded in your DNA that you don't know how to work without it anymore. The way Terraform works is that you express your code as simple text. So I want an S3 bucket, I want an EC2 instance, and here are the properties that it's going to have. And some of those properties are always the same, but some of them change as you go from dev to test to production. You might want to have 10 of a server in production with the most expensive instance type you can get, and 2 with the cheapest instance type you can get in dev. And that's where the 2 key dynamics in Terraform come in. You have your main.tf, that's where you express what I want. And then you have your tf-vars files, and there can be many different ones. These are just 2 example names, where you say, these are my variables. This is what's different in dev versus test versus prod. In particular, when you start taking that code and repurposing it elsewhere, you start taking those vars and customizing them more and more and more. So Terraform works by taking those files that you create and inspecting what you have running in AWS and storing what is there in a state file. Typically, we would store that in an S3 bucket, but there's a lot of ways you can do it. And that state file becomes the marker of truth. This is my starting point. When you run Terraform, you basically make changes to that state by changing your code, and then you ask Terraform, figure out what's different. That's called a plan. So a Terraform plan basically says, here's what I think is different. Here's what's changed in your code, and here's what I want to do about it. So in this example, I just created a simple S3 bucket, and I said, I want to have this name, and that's about it. Everything else here is a default setting. And then I said, Terraform, figure it out. This is what it came back to me with. So I can apply that plan then. And when I do, I get a bucket. So in first step, I ran a plan, and I said, add this bucket. I applied, and I ran an AWS S3LS CLI command to show me all my S3 buckets, and it's there. If I were to go comment that code out and apply again, I get a plan that says it wants to remove that bucket. And if I applied it, it'd be gone. That's the general idea. Obviously, when you start managing hundreds of resources in a real AWS account, it gets a little more complicated, but that's the basics. So let's take an example. CloudTrail, that thing they tell you you're supposed to turn on. But why? What are you using it for? What is its purpose? CloudTrail logs every single API call that you make to AWS. So anytime you're in the console, clicking around, every action you take generates an API call. Anything you do on the CLI generates an API call. But also anything your servers do to interact with AWS generates an API call. In fact, most of what happens in the API are services you create talking to other services, generating CloudTrail logs. So it's a huge data set. And for most people, they turn it on because somebody told them to, and they never look at it. And that's better than nothing, because if you do get hacked, at least you have a record of what happened. But better than getting hacked would be to take some action on it today. So we're going to look at a little example right now of that. So I've got an AWS account that I set up in Terraform, and I've set up very little. What I've set up so far is an S3 logging bucket. And the purpose of this bucket is to do nothing other than to hold the access logs for this bucket. So people forget that sometimes, but if you have a very sensitive bucket that you're putting things like all your API calls into, it's also a good idea to know who's looking at all those API calls. So we enable CloudTrail logging, and we enable an IAM password policy, and that's about it.
Hey, Chris. Sorry, could you either enlarge the text or just make it a little bigger? Some people mention it's hard to see.
Just in VS Code, or also in the PowerPoint?
I think VS Code, yeah.
Okay.
Is that really? Yeah.
Awesome. So it's a pretty basic account. And then I set up a couple of demo items that we'll use to test some of what we do. So to start with, I've got this security module, security project in my Terraform repo, and there's nothing in it right now. And what I want to do is I want to start learning interesting things that happen in CloudTrail. So I've got a module that lives in GitHub that you guys can all take a look at. And I'm happy to share this repo with you at the end. I think it's in one of the links. And this configures about 12 or 14 different basically canned searches, looking for things like, is somebody using the root account? And if you guys are using your root account in AWS, if I can leave you with one thing, stop doing that. Too many people do it, and it's worse than you think it is. Are you using MFA? Are you using overprivileged users? Have policies changed? Things like that that you should want to know about in most small to medium-sized AWS accounts where policies don't change constantly. So we're going to create a little module. And we're going to ask Terraform to apply it. And we're going to see what it wants to do. So it's a lot. It wants to create 30 objects. And what it wants to create is a series of metric alarms and metric filters. And the filters basically set a CloudWatch search string to look for, and the metric alarms tell it to take action on that. So what we're doing is we're saying right now, and these are low thresholds, if in 60 seconds you see one instance of in this case, a security group change, alert someone. What are we alerting? A notification topic. In this case, we're sending it to Slack because that's what everybody does. They send everything to Slack. So we're going to run it. It's going to take a minute. And we've got our little Slack site set up here. And we're going to move Zoom out of the way somehow. And we're going to go to the management console. And we've got this wonderful person, the accountant. And the accountant happens to be in the billing users group because she needs to see the bill and doesn't need to be an admin. Now, if someone comes along and attaches the administrator access policy, how often do you think people look at this to see that the admin access policy was attached? You might look at this screen once a week and you can't tell. You actually have to go in here and see administrator access. So our Terraform run finished. And if the demo gods are good, we're not going to wait for it because it usually takes 3 or 4 minutes. But at some point in this talk, we'll see a policy change alert that came, and we'll be able to look at why that happened. moving along. So we've got guard duty. Guard duty is similar to CloudTrail. Everybody says turn it on. Nobody ever looks at it. Once a month, you accidentally click on guard duty and you see that you have a bunch of findings that you didn't know about. And usually most of them were garbage. And so then you think guard duty doesn't do anything. But if you get them as they come in, it starts to become a more valuable tool. So in this case, to get guard duty into, say, PagerDuty, these are the steps that you need to take. And it seems tedious, which is why automation is nice, because automation can do this all for us. So let's add guard duty. And let's go back to Terraform. By the way, this is, again, common theme, modules, so that you figure out how to do it once and you don't have to figure out how to do it again. And let's see what it wants to do. The 50-50 shot, this doesn't work because I turned guard duty off manually right before this talk, and it doesn't like it when you turn it off and on again. But it wants to create a detector. It wants to create an event rule that says if you find a guard duty finding, and we send it to our alert topic, which in this case is PagerDuty. So let's go. Done. And let's go back to AWS and go to guard duty. And settings. And you can generate sample findings. Unfortunately, you can only generate them 56 at a time. But as you can see here, we have a bunch of different tests, basically a test of every different kind of finding that guard duty looks for. And those have all appeared in Slack. So Security Hub is a new product from AWS. Security Hub is intended to aggregate all of your alerts from both your applications, your third-party security products, and all of AWS's different services. It serves two functions in sort of practical day-to-day life. The first function is that it is a convenient place to see your AWS inspector vulnerabilities, your AWS config compliance, and your guard duty alerts. We use it at Rhythmic to view. We don't use it for notifications because it doesn't work great for notifications unless you're using it as your only place to look at notifications. In other words, it's not meant to also forward to some other system like Slack or PagerDuty where you're processing these alerts. It's meant to be the system. But in this example, actually, we already have Security Hub enabled. This is one that I needed to enable ahead of time, and I'll show you that code. And we have imported findings going to our notify topic, and we have custom actions going to our ticketing action topic. And the difference between those is that ticketing for us goes to Jira. It creates a Jira issue. And so we sort of have three different levels. We have Slack for keeping an eye on what's going on in your account. It's a real-time view of things that you need to be thinking about, but not necessarily taking action on, or things you need to be aware of. PagerDuty alerts are things that require you to get out of bed. They require your attention. They can't wait. Tickets are for everything in between. It can wait, it can sit. It shouldn't sit forever, but it can sit for a little bit. Imported findings are what Security Hub receives from AWS Config, from Guard Duty, from other services. They're just a laundry list. Custom actions are when your team would be reviewing them in Security Hub and saying, that's interesting, we need to take a look at that. And so this allows you to see in Slack the real-time stream and then say, oh, that's interesting, forward it to Jira in one click. That's really useful. But again, Security Hub is a beast, and don't turn it on unless you have a plan for how you want to use it.
Hey, Chris.
Yep.
I was going to mention, Jay Lockwood had a question in regards to, is there an AWS service similar to Azure Sentinel?
So I need a little more information on what Sentinel does. I think I know which service that is.
The
some
Azure service.
What's that?
That's an Azure service similar to Detective, Amazon Detective.
Okay, so
It's a symptom.
No, there's not a great, there's a lot of great third-party products, but there's not a lot of direct AWS native services for that yet. Control Hub or Control Tower, I think was started out to be that, but it hasn't quite evolved there yet.
They now have like Amazon Detective, which kind of pulls up like all the artifacts for a given kind of finding with more context and such. It's kind of like playing into the Sentinel space.
It is similar. It's a little more difficult to automate though.
Yeah, it's a pretty nascent right now, pretty brand new service.
Yeah, I think it'll become a much more integral service over time.
Chris, there was another question. I'm not sure if I missed this in transition here. From Joe Eugene earlier, how do you compare CloudFormation versus Terraform security model?
So CloudFormation, to us, CloudFormation is not a tool to deploy infrastructure. It's a tool to deploy applications. Obviously, you can deploy applications with Terraform and you can deploy infrastructure with CloudFormation, but CloudFormation tends to have trouble with changes over time. It supports it, but it's not meant necessarily to, for example, gradually modify infrastructure over time. And it can frequently put you in a spot where you're forced to delete things that other things are built on top of to make simple changes. It's gotten better over time, but it's still a common problem. Terraform is designed to let you gradually migrate infrastructure over time. What that means is that your Terraform code can be more durable, and your CloudFormation code can be for the things that come and go. So if you can deploy your app in CloudFormation, you can quickly spin up multiple environments for testing and things like that, which is great for security. Terraform side, if it's more durable, it can iterate and become more mature over time, and you can start building on top of it. So for us, we use CloudFormation a lot, but we use Terraform as the infrastructure for monitoring, for logging, for security. And then we use CloudFormation to tie into all of those hooks that we create in Terraform. Parameter store is a really good way to do that. So you can use parameter store to export how your applications should log and to report security events and stuff like that. And then they don't have to be directly coupled. So there's to us, they're complementary. There's a role for both at the right time and place.
Well, and we have another question, also from Joe. How do you do role assumption with Terraform? So
that's a question I'd love to talk about that will easily derail me. If it's all right, I'd like to do that at the end. I think we'll have time because the approach we use is actually very cool and could be a talk of its own, and I'd love to share it. All right, so getting back to this, AWS config, this is another one I enabled already, and the reason I enabled it ahead of the talk is because it takes a while to actually run. But let's take a look at AWS config. Let's look at Security Hub really quick. So Security Hub lets us see basically a snapshot of where we stand, and this is very useful. It's useful for everyone, and so we do recommend turning it on and just having this console view. And you can see where you are against the CIS benchmarks. You can see open inspector vulnerabilities, guard duty events. So it's pretty useful. In this case, we're failing miserably because the AWS config service was turned on after Security Hub, and it takes about 24 hours for it to actually process everything it learns from config about your account. So we'll probably be in the 60s tomorrow and feel pretty good about that. No, I don't want that. So AWS config will let us monitor for changes. We can also create rules. Did I turn this off? I don't think I did. So we can set rules, and I didn't do any in the demo, but I wanted to show them. And so config can send you notifications when something changed. So if somebody creates an EC2 instance, creates a security group, it can send a notification to Slack, which is super useful. But you can also set rules, and there's a lot of rules you can set. So Cloud Trail encryption enabled is one of those ones that you should set, and it should just never fire. Other ones will. So health checks, developers forget health checks all the time on their ELBs, and you can notify when that happens so that you guys can fix it. The problem with config rules is that they tend to generate noise because everybody says, why wouldn't I want to monitor for all of these things? And they turn them all on. So I recommend people start with config for change in infrastructure and then add in these rules over time, particularly where they can add a lot of value and solve a problem you're actually having. And we still don't have our policy alert. That's very sad. Let's go to, sorry, let's go to the next one. So this is the one that I really wanted to talk about today. This is something that I think even we fail to take advantage of as much as we should. It's really easy to get an application to log what's going on to CloudWatch. In this example, I used a Lambda, but even if you have an EC2 instance, you can install the CloudWatch monitoring agent on it and just capture your logs and get them in CloudWatch logs for free. Well, for a very cheap amount of money. But the benefit of it is that you can then build search strings and take action on it. So I've built an application. It's a very sophisticated web application. It's called Log Sad Things. And if we go take a look at what it's logging, I've had it running for a while, and it logs something different every time. So successful authentication, user logged out, invalid authentication attempt. It's not kind of what you see from a normal application. But what if you want to know if you're seeing a big spike in invalid authentication attempts? So first, let me show you how this app was configured. We have a simple little Lambda, and this is all in GitHub, so you guys can check it out. We have a simple little Lambda that just picks one of these things and logs it. And we use Terraform to deploy it. We zip it up. We set some policy for it of what it's allowed to do, which is not much. We create the function. And then we set it to run every minute. So I didn't want to sit here on the demo and just click, 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 click. So I just set a CloudWatch event rule to run this Lambda every minute, which has produced the logs we just looked at. And now what I want to do is I want to know when I've had an invalid authentication attempt. So let's add that. Let's tell Terraform to update again. And it wants to create a metric filter that looks for invalid authentication attempt. And it's going to alert anytime it finds one. I would recommend that you guys don't set an alert off every time someone fails to log in once, but this is a demo. And then we set an alarm on it. So if in 60 seconds we have one instance of this, we're going to send it to Slack. So let's run it. And now if we go back to our log group, to log sad things, and to metric filters, we see that we are looking for find sad things. So now we just need to wait for a sad thing to be logged. And I guess while we wait, are there any more questions?
Not at the moment. Someone mentioned why Terraform over something like Ansible. I was gonna ask that later because I feel like that's a larger topic. And someone else asked, what's the lag between the app error and seeing it in the Slack?
So I'll start with the easy one first. The lag depends on a lot of different factors, but generally speaking, it's a couple minutes. What you're waiting for in all of these is most of them is the CloudWatch log to be updated. So CloudTrail updates CloudWatch logs. The Lambda updates CloudWatch logs. Those are usually 30 to 60 seconds behind. But then you're also waiting for your threshold. So in this case, we set a threshold of within 60 seconds, and we have one evaluation period. So if we had 2 evaluation periods, it'd be twice, once in 60 seconds and once again in 60 seconds. We set a threshold of 1. So these 2 factors are going to influence how frequently it alerts. One of the things that you guys need to balance is if you set this too low, you're going to start getting lots of alerts for the exact same thing. So you want to set it to a reasonable balance. We usually do 300 seconds. And if for something that we don't want to see at all, we look for 1. So, if we have root access at all, I want to know about it and ask somebody, why are they using the root account? If somebody logged into my app with a bad password, I might want to set this to if it happened 5 times in 3 minutes or 5 minutes or something like that. And so those 2 factors will influence the delay. CloudTrail can delay quite a bit. So for example, at the beginning of this talk, we made the accountant an admin and it showed up a little late. The reason for that on CloudTrail is that CloudTrail tries to send batches to CloudWatch. And if you have a busy account, that happens about every 2 minutes. If you have a demo account that you're only using to do Zoom meetings, it doesn't get a lot of activity and it takes a long time to get a big enough batch to send to CloudWatch logs. So the other question, Ansible. So we use Ansible, Terraform, and CloudFormation together every day. For us, Ansible is best at configuring a server. And so we would frequently use Ansible in the past, where we would provision a server and then from a template and then bend it to whatever role it needed to have through Ansible. What we do a lot of now is we use Ansible as part of a Packer process to build an image, and then we would use either CloudFormation or Terraform to deploy it. It's certainly possible to use Ansible to manage an AWS account, and in fact, that's what we started doing. But Ansible doesn't have a concept of state. It basically determines configuration every time. And the disadvantage of that is that when you start getting into complex infrastructure, there are certain times where it doesn't accurately know what the state was and where it can't just determine it automatically from running CLI commands. And so it can be dangerous, it can have sharp edges, and 2, it can cause you to leave behind old infrastructure and not clean it up because you removed it from Ansible, but nothing new to remove it from AWS. So it's definitely a big part of our tool set, but it's not part of my everyday life like Terraform is. It's part of I need to build a new image. What should I use? I'll use Packer and Ansible together to build it, and then something like CloudFormation to deploy it. All right. So we're still waiting for this to come through. And while we do, a couple of closing notes. So I mentioned earlier, Security Hub is meant to be the hub. There's a reason why it has hub in the name. Don't use notifications on it unless you mean to use it as your true hub. AWS config, tons of rules. We go into customers all the time and they're paying $500–600 a month for AWS config because they checked every box, they turned it on, and they never looked at it once. If you like the rules, pick 1 a month, 1 a quarter, turn it on, and figure out how to take action on what it tells you. And until you've addressed everything from that rule, don't move on to the next one. Maybe most importantly, every time you turn on one of these automations, especially the ones we looked at today, make sure you know what you're going to do when you receive that notice. What action are you going to take and who's responsible for it? especially if it goes to Slack. Don't create a Slack room that everybody in the company mutes their second week on the job because it's too damn noisy. Figure out how to partition your alerts to the audience that it matters to. Developers probably don't care about most of these notifications, so don't send it to them. Send them the ones they care about, and send your IT team, if you don't have a security team, the security ones in a different Slack room. There is no reason for you to not have more Slack channels than you have employees, unless you're like probably AWS size, then that'd be weird. But use more Slack rooms rather than having noisier individual Slack rooms. And start small, start somewhere. If you have CloudTrail turned on, that's great. That's a good starting point, because if something does happen, you have a way to find out what happened. Set an IAM password policy. Stop using the root account, please, and rotate your keys. Rotate your keys is one that I had a hard time putting in here, because for us, getting back to role-based assumption, we don't use keys at Rhythmic, period, because they just get you into trouble. And then turn on the CIS benchmarks. So our Terraform modules automate most of the CIS compliance benchmarks. You need to do some work on your own on a couple of things, but this makes a big difference. This means that, you know, if you go back to the talk earlier, if your Kubernetes cluster gets popped and you're running it in EKS, if you've got a CIS compliant AWS account, you're in much better shape than if you just put your credit card in and started building infrastructure on top of it. All right, so something. It's okay.
We just had 2 questions. I think one of them got answered, but Petres Skotko asked, are you guys using Terraform Cloud or equivalent to manage your large environments? If not, what's your approach of assembling large environments? And how do you handle your credentials in Terraform? Which I know someone put in the chat, creds can be passed on as environment variables, credential file, or role.
Yeah, so the first question about managing large Terraform projects. So we have a project, sample AWS project, and the project I did tonight is a fork of this. And this is just a very basic account. It doesn't even create a VPC. This is how we approach Terraform. We like to lay out into a series of projects. So this is one repo, and we have an account project that has your core monitoring and basic security settings, IAM policy, and authentication. We would almost always have a network project. We would have an application project. If it's a big environment, we'd have multiple application projects, and we would silo the code for each respective domain into those projects. The idea is that your Terraform blast radius becomes minimized. In terms of deployment, there's a great project called Atlantis. And I say great because it serves a really awesome function, but it's also buggy as hell and has lots of sharp edges. But we use that to automate deployment in what I would say are more mature environments. And that lets you use GitHub branches where you can literally in your pull request process have the Atlantis bot dumping in a Terraform plan where your PR reviewers see the code that changed and the plan that Terraform would run. And as part of the merge process, you can apply it. The nice thing about that is that you can let your developers have the authority to create code and to deploy code, but not without going through Atlantis. So you could be, basically Atlantis could be your only account administrator, and you could use repository owners to say only these 3 people have the authority to approve the Atlantis bot to deploy the changes. It's a really great way to work around things like IAM policy restrictions, because you can't deploy a Lambda if you can't deploy IAM policy. And if you let your developers deploy their own IAM policy, you have no IAM policy. So getting back to authentication really quick, did that address that question?
We actually got quite a few great questions in there, so we might have to compile them till the end here for you, Chris.
All right, well, let me talk about the one I want to talk about, how we do authentication. So we use a project that Segment.io actually just recently stopped maintaining called AWS Okta. Our company uses Okta for a single sign-on for everything, AWS included. But what a lot of people don't realize is that you can use platforms like Okta for command line authentication. So we use, in our master account, we have integrated it with Okta with SAML. And then we have our primary roles, and then we have assume roles. So for all of our sub accounts, we can assume a role through our master account into that sub account, basically using cross-role authentication and role assumption. And that generates an STS token. So what that means is that we don't have AWS access keys on our laptops, period. We use the AWS Okta client, we use MFA, and we use cross-account roles. And I don't have a great way to share this without showing you things I can't share you, but we'll publish a GitHub project that has exactly how we do it, with the accounts scrubbed for obvious reasons. But we run the AWS Okta client, and we use what's called the credential process. Basically, you can, in your AWS config file, tell it, assume this role and run this credential process. And what happens then is that in this example that I showed at the very beginning, I ran AWS S3 LS. I don't have any AWS credentials set. What I have is an AWS profile set, and I have it set to the correct target account and role. And then the AWS Okta client will be invoked through the credential process. It will call STS, it will get a short-term token, and it will inject it into the environment every time something calls it. So my AWS S3 LS call just worked, just like I had credentials stored on my laptop, but I don't have credentials stored on my laptop. It's MFA friendly, so everybody in my company is angry every hour when they're running commands and all of a sudden their session time's out and they need to do a duo auth again, but it's worth it. Terraform is totally compatible with this. You just need to set an environment variable. AWS sideload config equals 1, I think is what you need to set. And Terraform will then delegate to the credential process. This works with just about everything we use. The only thing it doesn't work with is serverless, because they have a busted Node AWS CLI. Well, AWS has a busted Node SDK that they need to fix, and serverless is dependent on it. So this is a great way to run. Once you get it set up, when you create a new AWS account, we just have some Terraform that we run that applies the roles into it, and then we're in it. We don't have to do anything special. It's just literally something we set up once in our master account. And I think it'd be probably a good blog post for us to put up to just walk you guys how to go through it. What else?
Ready for questions?
I thought that's what this was.
Okay, just making sure. Miss Sarah?
Yeah, I was gonna mention first, before we jump right into questions, I wanted to first thank you and Rafael for coming to speak and helping us help our community. And Rafael, if you're still there, I'm gonna be sending both of you guys a $50 AWS promotional gift card to use AWS services. And I wasn't sure, just in case you guys didn't want it or didn't need it, I can always either raffle it away to someone in the audience, or you guys can also just keep it. I also do have a $25 one for someone in the audience or attendees.
Oh, so many gifts today.
Yeah, we're trying to up our game now.
I would personally love for you guys to raffle it off to somebody who's interested in setting some of this stuff up. There's a lot you can do in the AWS free tier, but if you start turning on all of these services to play with and learn, you're quickly going to spend $25. So I'd love to see somebody else try this. Okay.
And Rafael mentioned he was okay with raffling it off, so I'll just do that more towards the end. But we can go ahead and get started with some of the questions towards you, and then we can get back to Rafael's last slides. So Christina, I wasn't sure if you saw the question, the next question.
Yeah, me and Brianna wrote most of them down. Would you like me to get them going? Sure. I know you kind of paused on this one, Chris, about how do you do role assumptions with Terraform?
Yeah, so the authentication that I was just talking about, that is how we do role assumption. So it's all STS tokens, and for us, it's cross-account role assumption. Okay. And I will, Brianna, yell at me if I don't, I will in the next 2 weeks put up a blog post about how we do that, and specifically how we use Terraform to do that.
Hey, Chris, thank you so much for this session. My question is a little bit more deeper targeted. So if you go into CloudFormation, you will see an assumption, meaning you are providing that service. You're not providing the user. The user itself does not have permission, but the user has access to assume privileges and give CloudFormation the access. So what I'm saying is TF does not allow that. The other problem that I saw with TF is that managing state. So if you have a larger organization and you have a network team, a security team, and some other teams, they all need to have their own role split and run Terraform or CloudFormation individually to manage their own level of permissions. When you get into that sort of stuff and try to manage that inside the cloud, not run command line on your machine, inside the cloud, like run it through code pipeline or something like that, it becomes very hairy, very messy to manage.
It really depends. You have to adapt your approach to make it work. I would argue that no matter what you're doing at that scale, they're all hard to do well and efficiently in different ways. With Terraform, it lends itself really well to multi-account strategies. And for us, we don't believe in managing 100% of the infrastructure with Terraform. We believe in managing the parts that make sense. If you think about the context of a security team, we didn't really get into like guard duty master account and security hub master account, but you can use a combination of Terraform and SCP service control policies to very efficiently auto-wire all of your accounts to send telemetry of all kinds, CloudTrail, everything. You can configure that in SCP, which you can configure in Terraform. So you don't necessarily, as a security team, need to be running Terraform in your, what I'll call your customer accounts, your business units accounts. You can instead use Terraform to create SCP and let SCP do that for you. And typically SCP is things like CloudFormation templates that are laid down, which to us is perfectly compatible with using Terraform. The other thing is in code pipeline, when you want to truly automate, again, that's where things like Atlantis come in. And that's where you really get the security benefit, because then your users aren't privileged to take the operations that their code is instructing. You rely on your review process and your linting and your other stages of the pipeline to make sure that what was supposed to happen is what happened. Yeah, if you just use Terraform out of the box and you start rolling it out to 100 account organization, you're going to have a bad time. But if you segment correctly and you let your sub accounts own their own Terraform repos and rely on SCP to enforce the things you need to enforce, I've seen it manageable at easily 100 account organization just fine. I think it's comparable to the other the commercial platforms that are out there, and Terraform has its own in enterprise that can do some of the things that some of the commercial platforms do, but I find it to be a nice to have more than a necessity to run at scale.
You also have like the workspace concept within Terraform, so you can segregate, like compartmentalize if you have multiple teams, so that the states are stored in different workspaces. So if you want to share a single S3 bucket and lock down your state, you can easily do that with like the workspace. So that will also give you like some level and set up bucket policies and such, which role can write to which workspace are prefixed within the bucket. So that's like another way to actually look at solving, like sharing between the teams.
Yeah, workspaces are, I think, one of the essentials to run Terraform across accounts and to run it in a mature way. And you can do things like we use shared account state, where we have a central bucket that nobody has, direct admin access to, that holds the shared state for all the accounts in an organization. And you can use prefixes to say that if you're an admin in this sub account, you can only see the state of that sub account. But you can actually go a step further, and we've prototyped it, but we haven't done it in production yet, where you can say that your individual projects are restricted to. So only my super admins can make changes to the account and network projects, but my developers can make change to the app project. And workspaces is what makes all that possible.
Yeah, so it's a little bit different than that. In this realm, there are no super admins. There is no concept of any kind of a super admin. For example, there is a network role is assumed by network people, and they only can make PPC changes, like security group changes. But even at that point, they cannot manually, they're not permitted to manually, by hand, make a security group change. It has to be applied by some other automatic entity. And it is goes through the SDLC lifecycle, where you have development integration. Once that is passed through development, it automatically is passed, and then it has to get pushed upwards. Meaning there is no actual engineer even in network security who can go in and manually make a change through AWS console. So once you get into that level of stuff, we tried Terraform for that purpose, and it just broke.
Yeah, that's a very unusual deployment model. It's a good one. There's nothing wrong with it, but it does, when you get to that, when you're doing it that way, where you're basically doing almost like a true old school RBAC type style, I could see ways to do it in Terraform, but Terraform isn't the tool I would use if I had to work that way.
I mean, if you want to put controls in.
For those reasons, we just said no, because it was getting too complicated to make those changes like that, because we don't want to permit the user to go manually fat type security group and make a change and not know what they're doing. So we want to make sure that they are permitted and they know actually they are kind of forced to use automation tool to make that change, as opposed to making that change by hand.
So you can still do that with Terraform, just not to the extent that I think you explored. So Atlantis integrated into your pipeline can be the tool that you give the authority to run the commands, and you can gate how that is triggered. So we do it in pull request merges, where we say two code owners have to, for that particular repo, have to approve. But you can do it other ways as well. But Atlantis would be the key there, is that the user would never know how they're terraformed. They wouldn't apply their Terraform. They would not have the authority to. Atlantis would have the authority to, and your approval process would be what determines what triggers Atlantis. But still, it would be very difficult to use Atlantis and have one Atlantis that's able to do network changes and one that's able to do EC2 changes. Like that level of granularity would be very difficult to do with Terraform.
Okay, so
thank you, Chris.
I'm gonna interject right now. If it's okay with you, Chris, I want to get back to Rafael's slides in the beginning. But hopefully if you have time after they're done, we could also jump into some breakout rooms so that people can, if you're able to answer more questions, or if not, people can definitely reach out to you, via LinkedIn or Twitter.
Sure. Yeah, I want to see the rest of Rafael's talk, so I'm happy to do that.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, me too. Me too. So Rafael, if you wanna go ahead. Okay, awesome. And then you can share.
Okay, I can share my screen, right?
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
I'm glad everyone's getting really, really excited, which is why I love doing this. So.
Thank you. Yeah. All right, so let's go back to where we left it. I think I was talking about network policies. So basically, like I say, Kubernetes inside the cluster, there is the network, the pods network, where there is no restriction by default, right? So any pod can talk to any pod. So I could bring in a pod in my namespace, and I can scan the whole network, including the pods deployed on the Kube system namespace. So we have a thing called network policies in Kubernetes that is namespaced by default, vanilla Kubernetes namespaced. In other words, there is no network policies for the cluster. Is applied to a particular namespace and to a particular pods, and is based on labels. And again, it's not a firewall, but you can control incoming traffic and outgoing traffic based on those labels, namespace level, pod level labels, and IPs as well. Now, the network in Kubernetes is controlled by the CNI plugin, basically the network controller interface, right? So not all these CNI plugins behave the same way. And in fact, if you're in AWS, EKS by default, it does not support network policies, or any cluster that runs with the AWS CNI plugin in it, by default, does not support network policies. Now, you can extend that plugin with something like Calico, which is a very, very popular one. And you can add that capability of having recognizing network policies in your cluster. Calico, there is another one very well known, is Cilium. They both offer a cluster wide network policies. Like, the previous slide said, by default in Kubernetes, vanilla Kubernetes does not support cluster network policies, but these two plugins in particular, and there are many other plugins, but probably Calico is the most popular one, and Cilium is getting a lot of attraction. And again, if you use a cluster with AWS CNI, you can deploy a network policy in your cluster. Kubernetes will happily take it, but it will have no effect whatsoever, okay? So how a network policy looks like. This is a topic for another talk. I'm just gonna give you a quick example of how it works, and the good practices or recommendation from the security standpoint. So basically here on the left, this is 3 screenshots, but basically this is actually the same file. I just split it in 3 parts. So the first part is you define your regular manifest information, your metadata, CAN, API version, and your specification there, where this pod selector, you say, okay, I'm going to apply this network policy to any pod in this case, okay, that has the label role equals DB. Okay, and then you're going to apply the policy types. Is going to be ingress for incoming traffic and egress for outgoing traffic. Now, in your ingress, you can specify what traffic are you accepting. Yeah. So in this case, we're accepting traffic from this range of IPs, except this 172.17.10/24. I'm also accepting traffic from any pod in a namespace that the namespace label has project equals my project, or also I'm going to set traffic from any pod, period, that has this label, okay? This dashes in the beginning, it's very important, because if you have like a dash, it means like an or. If I omit this dash and this one here, it will be an and. So you have to be very careful with network policies. Again, network policies is a bigger topic, and I don't have time for that. And also you can specify the ports and the protocol, right? You can say, okay, I'm gonna only accept traffic, in this case, protocol using the protocol TCP to my port number 6379, right? And then on the egress side, basically what you are specifying is what traffic are you gonna allow to go out of your pod, where in this case, the pod that matches this role, DB, right? This match levels. In this case, well, you are gonna only allow traffic to this range of IPs and to the port 5978 TCP, sorry. So any other communication that you will try to do from this pod, it won't be allowed. So what is the good recommendation is, by default, just drop this network policy in your namespace. What this does is to basically cut all traffic in and out from every pod in your namespace. In other words, if you drop this network policy in your namespace, you cannot even communicate with your pods, and your pods cannot communicate with anybody, which is a good start. That's where you want to go, right? We're going to start with this, the least privilege principle, right? Where you cannot do anything. And then you start dropping other network policies, okay? And start opening the traffic that you need. Traffic that is, accepting connection from certain places. And if you don't actually have to communicate with any other service, external service, just leave it like that. Don't allow any communication out of your pod. So at the beginning, I showed you this demo, right? With this application that's vulnerable. On the left side here, the screenshot on the left side, this is how the application was deployed, which is with the very minimum settings in your container specification template. Now, on the right side, this is going to be the new deployment that I'm going to do. Well, actually, it's already done, but I'm going to show you now how the application behaves using this deployment. As you can see, the difference here is the security context section that I'm touching all the different points that I talk about in the presentation, plus this first line about the service token, the service account token. Okay, so, well, 40 minutes ago, maybe like an hour and 40 minutes ago, I showed you that demo. And, we saw path traversal vulnerabilities, RC, remote execution, credential exfiltration, we can exfiltrate the token, data exfiltration, etc. So let me show you a quick demo now of the second application. This is the first one I show you. The second tab here is this exactly same application, no changes in the code or whatsoever. The only difference here is the deployment, okay? So still, I should be able to still create nodes. Demo 2, and I should be able still to see my nodes there. Cool. Now, let's try to do some of the things that we did before. So now, if I try to do a debug, remember that endpoint that the developer left open by default? If I try to do this, you can see nothing happened. Let me bring up my terminal because I had the logs in here. This is the error I'm getting right now here. So basically, what is happening right now is that this new version is deployed using this Docker file that I showed you at the beginning too, with using a distroless distribution or image. So that distroless, like I say, it has nothing in it but this particular binary of the application and the live server runtime. That's all you have in there, pretty much. So there is no shell, there is no libraries, there is no tools that you can run or execute. So if I try to run some application or some command here, it's not going to allow me, because you can see the error I'm getting is like, hey, this sh, which is the shell, it doesn't exist. So you cannot run any command or whatsoever. So the application is still vulnerable to remote command execution, but because of the container doesn't have a shell in there right now, you cannot execute anything in there, right? The other thing that we saw too was that I could overwrite the content of the result.com, for instance, right? In the etc, I'm gonna put something here, it doesn't matter. So I'm gonna change this to etc/etc. Let's see what's happening now when I do this. The application breaks. Why? Well, it's telling me, this is telling me that this file that I'm trying to overwrite is mounted as a read-only in the file system. Why? Because we now are mounting the whole file system as read-only, leaving only the /nodes, which is the directory where the application is keeping those nodes. And the other thing I was going to show you is the token that we were able to exfiltrate. So let me go back to the application here. So now let's go to the list. In here, I'm gonna put here token, and I'm gonna change the path to I'm gonna copy here, I have it somewhere. There we go. I'm gonna copy here. It's quite long. Okay, so if I try to now get this token file, well, now getting a different error. I said it says this file here, which was the token initially in the other version of the application, it says the file doesn't exist anymore because we told Kubernetes, hey, do not mount this token here because I'm not gonna use it. So this is a credential that I don't need to use. So I don't need to have it in my container. That way, it's no way that it can be stolen or exfiltrated. And one more thing I wanted to show you too. In the other, and I'll do it from this application, this version, because I can execute commands. One of the things that I did was to, if you remember, it was to download the Google's index page, right, with this command. So I could download the Google index page because I had connectivity in my pods. Now let me do something here. Let me drop in this in my namespace. Let me drop this network policy. I'll show you the content of it, which is pretty much the screenshot I showed you in the slides, right? So when I drop this network policy, what's going to happen is that Kubernetes is going to deny all the traffic, ingress or egress, in all the pods in the namespace I'm going to drop it. So if I apply this file here, it's called deny all traffic. Okay, if I apply this network policy and I go back to my application, like I say, now I'm not going to be able even to access, because right now Kubernetes is actually blocking the incoming traffic and the outgoing traffic. So as you can see, it keeps waiting and waiting and waiting. So it's not going to work. So, but let's say, well, I just want to let people come in, and in this case, anybody, right? I'm going to just let them come in, but I'm not going to let anything go out of my cluster. So for that, I'm going to drop this other network policy. So the network policies, they add to each other, and the less restrictive wins, basically. If you say, I don't want traffic to allow traffic from here, and then you drop another network policy that says, I won't allow traffic from here, then the traffic is allowed, okay? So I'm gonna open the egress. I'm gonna deny the egress traffic only. So basically here now, I'm gonna drop another network policy that says, okay, just block egress, okay? Ingress is fine, let it come in, but nothing goes out. So if I deploy this network policy here, apply, deny egress, I'm gonna drop this network policy. Now, if I see the application now works, so now I can come in and I can do things. But remember what I did before with the Google thing? Let's see what happened now when I try to go to Google again. I'm gonna copy here. I'm gonna try to download again the file from Google. So it's gonna be waiting because Kubernetes is actually blocking that connection. And eventually wget is gonna say, hey, bad address, I don't know, I can't access to it, okay? So, all right. So that was the second demo, right quickly. So to summarize, basically, hardening your deployments doesn't mean fixing vulnerabilities, okay? That has to be very clear. If you have a vulnerability in your application, you gotta go and fix your code. If you have a remote code execution vulnerability in your application, don't say, well, you know what, I'm gonna put this application in a distro-less container so people cannot execute anything and I'm good to go. No, don't do that, okay? Fix your code and do also, deploy your application and distro-less. That's an option for you, so you can even protect better your system, right? This actually helps to constrain an attacker. Like the things that we've seen here, will allow or will avoid an attacker, number one, move laterally. If you cut those network connections, you won't allow the attacker moving around your network. If you don't allow the attacker to download, modify your system, you probably won't allow the attacker to create persistence. Exfiltrate, yeah, you can still exfiltrate the data from the application, right? But this is not gonna fix things, or it's not gonna help with things like SQL injection, client-side script, client-side vulnerabilities like cross-site scripting, CSRF, and that kind of stuff, because that's actually what the client stuff is happening on the client side. On the server side, like SQL injection, for instance, is something that is data from the application. So if you have a vulnerability, the attacker is still going to be able to pull out that data from your application, but will not be able to pull out things from other places, especially, you know, like I show you the credential, right? If I don't need that credential in there, don't put in there. That way, if the attacker compromise your application, it will not be able to exfiltrate that information because it doesn't exist. And, you know, like a question that somebody asked at the beginning, like, you know, Docker and Kubernetes, why are more less secure? I guess, well, it's, you know, they're developed for developers in mind to make them, you know, make it useful for them to use them. Because if you make something hard to use, nobody's going to use it. And if the product is really, really good, but nobody uses, it's useless, right? So you need to find like some common ground where it's, okay, it's secure enough, but at the same time, it has to be friendly and easy to use. So that's where Docker and Kubernetes kind of stand. But it's very important for developers, and not just developers, operations and administrators and, you know, security people to know this kind of stuff so they can help each other, you know, coming to a SecDevOps or DevSecOps or this kind of environment where collaboration is key, and we all can share this kind of information so everybody's on the same page. And now let me actually leave you with a question. When you develop a service or you're gonna deploy something, don't ask yourself, what are you gonna do if your application gets compromised? Ask yourself, what are you gonna do when your application gets compromised? Assume that your application gets compromised, because you put a condition in that question. Guess what? Why does this not gonna happen to me, right? That's what we all think. It's not gonna happen to me. That something that happened to other people, but not to me. And eventually, guess what? It will. In fact, there is somebody who said there are two types of companies: companies that have been compromised and companies they don't know that have been compromised. In looking at the statistics, it looks like a company usually takes about 7 months to a year to identify if there is somebody inside the network, you know, like looking around and stealing data or whatever, doing whatever they need to do. So yeah, remove the condition from the question and ask yourself when. What are you gonna do when that happens? It's gonna happen. And with that, I am done. And if you guys have any question.
Hey, Rafael, I have one. How do you, so like applying all these security policies, getting developers to apply it to every single deployment they do in Kubernetes is probably unrealistic. What tools do you use to help template it and make it easier for developers to write non-shitty deployment manifests, basically?
Right. Well, you have a couple of tools. I think it's Q Audit. We can audit your files manifesto, your deployment manifesto. Today we use Helm to deploy applications, and this is like few lines that you add to your deployment, and that's all you need to do. And again, this is a bunch of stuff that I'm telling you that you can put in your deployment. Sometimes you cannot apply all of them for some reason, right? But at least try, like I said at the beginning, you know, like, well, I have this container that has to run with some, you know, elevated privileges. Well, do you really need that? Is there anything you can change the architecture? Is there anything you can change to be able to deploy a, you know, something with high escalated privileges? But I mean, honestly, this is just one thing, right? You create your deployment file. This is no code that you change every day. This is just one manifesto configuration file that you hopefully create once, and it should be all. It should be go. You shouldn't have to make a lot of changes during the deployment of your services. So, and then you also have this what I mentioned before, the past security policies that are policies that you can deploy in the cluster. Why? And you can, some of this stuff that we've seen, you can actually make them a policy in your cluster. So if you say, hey, I'm gonna put this policy that no pods is gonna run as root, then no matter what you put in your deployment files, if you try to run a pod as root, Kubernetes is gonna reject it. It's not gonna allow it to happen, right? The problem with that is that you might have some exceptions, and then people complain. And so depending on how big your team, your clusters, and how many teams you have, and that kind of stuff, you might be in better position to apply, a more restrictive policies in your whole cluster than, hey, I'm gonna relax a little bit the cluster policies and quote unquote pray for the developers to take care of security in this area. But yeah, I mean, it's something that you usually create once at the beginning or at some point when you're ready to deploy, and that's it. That's done.
Hi, Rafael. This is Dapo. I just wanted to ask a quick question. Earlier on, you were talking about the network policies, and you did mention about namespace selectors. Are those the way that you can allow traffic from another namespace to come into the main namespace that you've defined in your manifest? Is that what that namespace selector is for?
Correct. Yeah. So let me go back to the example. So here in the ingress, you can, you have labels. You can do label selection by pods with the pod selector, or by namespace. And again, you can, with the dashes, we're saying, or coming traffic from, or this range of IPs, or this namespace, or this pod select. If you want to only allow traffic from the pods, let's say with the label role frontend in this namespace, you remove this dash here, and then that would be an and condition. Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yep.
Awesome. And Rafael, I was gonna interject so we can do some of the raffles, and then if depending on how you and Cris feel, we can just continue with questions as people.
Yep, I'll be here. I'm locked down thanks to COVID.
yeah, I got you. Thank you again. I'm going to share my screen real quick.
Okay, I'll stop sharing here. Sarah, if you want to share that link, that link has the application that I showed you today and the Kubernetes files that I used for the demo. So feel free to.
Yeah.
Yep. And I stopped sharing. So let me see what I do there. There you go.
Okay, so we have 29 people who are still here, including us. So thank you guys so much for staying. We're very glad that you guys are as passionate about this as we are, and totally geeking out. I found a wheel builder. Can you guys see this?
Nope.
Wait, give me 1 second. Can you guys see this here?
Okay.
Yes. Okay, so I built a wheel, guys.
Totally random, right?
Yeah, it's totally random. It's numbers, and I'm just gonna count down after the hosts and co-hosts. Thanks, Tulin. I'm gonna go ahead and spin the wheel. Let me see if I can. Oh no, I want sound, obviously. That's what makes it fun. Yeah. Is that a? Okay, yeah, it's a 1. Okay, so Adnain. Are you here, Adnain?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. If you can send me actually, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna send you a message with my email, and if you just email me, I'll respond with the promotional codes that I got from AWS. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
Second win, Adnan. That's great.
Yeah. Okay. Let me spin again. So we have we're raffling off the second one, that's $50, and then I'm gonna be raffling the $30. Oh, sorry, the $25 one after. Here's for 50. Ooh, 6. Okay, so 6 is, let me see, 1, 2, 3. Cersei? Is that how you pronounce your name? Okay, awesome. Do you accept the prize? Okay, awesome. So I also sent you my email. Just mention you know, that you won the $50 raffle, and then here it's for 30. Let me see if I can change the. Okay, just kidding. Okay, so hopefully it doesn't end on a low number. Ooh, 30. Okay. 30 is the last person. So Chuba. Wait. I have Chuba on here twice.
I think one's for his audio and one's for his other setting, I believe.
Double the odds to win.
Yeah. Okay, Chuban. Chuban, are you there? Chuba? Okay. So Chuba is not there. Not sure why. Okay, so I'm gonna roll one more time. And we got 25. Okay, I'm gonna just count from the top down. So Sudhir Charalavara, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, awesome. So I'm guessing you're gonna accept the prize too, right?
Sure.
Okay, awesome. So I'll go ahead. So I sent you my email as well, and just mention the $25. And yeah, and then I know, Christina, you guys had one more raffle.
Yep.
Okay. So you guys like the.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sarah, I have one question for you. Actually, I have a question for Chris. Is it is it best thing to email him, or how do you want me to respond? I kind of lost earlier. Yeah. Sorry.
For the raffle?
Not for the raffle. Pertaining to the terraforms and.
Oh yeah. So we're gonna continue after the raffles.
Okay.
Yeah, and then if anything, I can try and make a question, a list of some questions, and hopefully I'll get them answered.
Okay, maybe you know what? I'll send it over the chat session. So yeah.
I just dropped my email address in the chat. I'm going to hang around to answer some questions, but if anyone needs to drop or just prefers to email me, I'd be more than glad to talk about it more.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Awesome.
So thank you again all for joining us this evening. I know Sarah and Brent put a great meetup, even in person and even these virtual ones. I know this is our third one. It's going swimmingly well. And to kind of end our sponsorship with this awesome group, and thank you for those amazing questions. Again, Chris did put that in there, his email. So definitely reach out. I know we weren't able to answer all of the questions this evening, but great points. With that, I would almost nudge him to come back for more and see if he can provide some more talks for you all. But to round it off, we have 2 more trivias. This will be for $15. Again, we ask that you pick a location that has 5 establishments or less, or just let us know. We can donate to charity. Brianna will be reaching out to you, either the chat room to get your information, and then we can complete that for you. So the question is, for the 25 of us in the room here tonight, again, thank you for sticking around. So this is like a Jeopardy question. So it's, what is that answer, right? So to build, test, and deploy code to production, the automated testing is much needed. What would that be?
Integration testing?
Nope. To build, test, and deploy code to production, the automated testing is much needed. It's a blank testing.
Do 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 do. We'll start singing.
Continuous integration, continuous deployment.
Nope.
Blue-green deployment.
It's something you guys know, and I'm from a non-tech side, know that you guys know this. It's not coming. It's a letter blank letter test.
What?
It's a
BICD?
letter blank or letter dash letter testing. Oh, all right, Davina.
Oh, A/B testing, yeah.
Yep, A/B testing. That's the winner, Davina. Thank you so much, Fournier. Brianna will be reaching out to you to get your information. And that'll be for $15. Thank you. Okay, last one. This one is a throwback, and I think my president, if not my boss, will be proud that I even pulled this one out. So this is a picture. It's gonna I'm gonna show a portion of the logo, and you just gotta say what it is. Okay. All right. Here's what this is. Do you know what it is? It's not the complete logo because I got it cut off. I didn't want to show it all, but this is a very old school logo to a platform back in the day. It's kind of clovered out. Almost like 3 or 4 pieces. Oh, there's 4. Ooh. Come on.
SUS?
Mm-mm. It was an old platform for communicating. Kind of how I was told. It was like before Reddit. You know, what was before Reddit?
4chan.
Ah. Is that Miss Ashley? Did Miss Ashley did I hear you?
Say hi, Miss Christina.
Hi, Miss Christina.
Hi. Okay, so Miss Ashley, that was 4chan. Yep, this is the old school, well, not all of it, you guys can't see it all, but it is 4chan. And it's just an old school, I was told it's an old school Reddit, an old school, forum platform that it used to be back in the day before, but I hear it's still around. It's where all the black market stuff happens. Anyhow, thank you for playing, Ashley.
That was Nathaniel that answered.
Oh, dang. Okay. Yeah. So Nathaniel, you just figure out your prize. Brianna's going to reach out to you and we need your email and things like that. Thank you. Thank you so much for playing, everybody. But yeah.
Thank you everyone for coming out here. Thank you everyone for joining and for staying as late as you guys did. We'll definitely open up the room to some questions, but also thank you to Cris and to Rafael for letting me raffle away those prizes. So if you want, we can start on the questions now.
Yes, this is Sudhir. I have a question for Cris. So on the Terraforms, I'm doing that day in and day out recently. So the 2 questions that I have. One, how do we what are the best automated testing tools that we have that can be leveraged for testing the infrastructure? One. And the second thing is, he mentioned about Security Hub and all the, cloud trial, cloud AWS config and other things, right? So, so my question is, how can we integrate security in the DevOps, in the pipeline itself? 1, automated testing. 2, the security to ensure that whatever infrastructure I built in is secure or compliant, other words. So yeah, those are the 2 questions that I have.
So testing is definitely one of the areas where I think Terraform is least mature, but I would also argue that I don't know that anybody is mature in this right now, and that the limitation is in what AWS offers. It's difficult to unit test because you can't spin up a green account that hasn't been touched with and truly get a real test of a full-blown infrastructure deployment. So we rely on things like TerraTest and module level testing rather than what we call repo level testing, which is what actually gets applied to the accounts. So we try and put as much as humanly possible in modules. We try to make everything dry as possible. and then we make the modules have the best tests that we can. But it's definitely an area where we feel like we could do a lot better if we had some better, I guess, API support on the AWS side for testing infrastructure.
Okay.
For us, the biggest thing we do is test the modules with automation and put eyeballs on the plans. So we make sure that our PRs are where we're reviewing the Terraform plan to make sure that it's doing what's expected. That's not ideal, but that's where we are today.
So essentially, peer review is the kind of go-to at this point of time based on what you mentioned.
Yeah, if for what it's worth, we try and do as little as possible with Terraform. So I mentioned earlier we do Ansible and Packer, which Ansible has a lot better testing that you can do. We're moving to EC2 Image Builder, which is awesome and now supports CloudFormation. And that lets us do automated tests, like some really awesome automated testing of our images. So that's really exciting. So we're trying to do in Terraform, basically what I would say is large repeatable operations of things that we built elsewhere that were tested elsewhere, if that makes sense.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Recently, I was digging into the Terraform site, and one thing that I came across, I'm a newbie on that space, so I came across this Terraform Terra test. So I'm not sure whether that's that's the way to go, or peer review and the approach that you mentioned is the way to go. Kind of, I'm in that juncture where which direction to adapt and move forward is the thing I was thinking. But thanks for your...
Where we are today is Terra test for modules and peer review for code for the repos themselves. So before it actually goes out to production. I'd like to get to the point where we can do Terra test in our broader infrastructure repos, but we haven't found it very useful yet. And I just put in the chat why. If you write bad Terraform code, even if you write good Terraform code in some cases, and you do an apply and you do a destroy, it's supposed to put it back the way it was. If everything worked the way it was supposed to on apply, destroy is pretty reliable. But if you didn't apply cleanly because you had a bug in your code, the destroy doesn't work and it leaves behind a tainted AWS account, and then all your tests fail until you clean it up manually. And it like daily when you're doing it on the repo. So it's a big problem right now, I think.
Yep, I agree with you. It's only unidirectional at this time. There is no rollback or all those things. So yeah, I got it. I got it.
I actually just literally yesterday texted a friend at AWS and begged him for a baseline feature where you could just tell an account to revert back to a baseline, because then we could do real testing.
Yeah. Yeah, got it. Yeah, how about on the other question when it comes to the security, okay, well, again, I believe that blends with your earlier question of the peer reviewing and checking when it comes to the drift or, our compliance side. Is that the approach, or is there anything better that can be done?
So it depends on how mature you want to be. For us, we tend to be managing infrastructure that a dev team is building on top of. So our customers are dev teams. And typically they would have much different levels of access than us. Sometimes within our own company, we have segregated levels of access too. But basically, for the developers that are doing things repeatably, they would have access to what they need and not be writing Terraform. They would be deploying CloudFormation templates or kicking off CI/CD jobs, things like that.
Okay.
I don't know of a great way to do truly granular Terraform managing 100% of an infrastructure. We have clients where we do manage 100% in Terraform, especially if it's like a Java app or a PHP app or something like that, where it's one repo that has their app code and our Terraform. It doesn't work any other way other than you could have Atlantis programmatically do the deploy, but something somewhere needs to be a full admin if you're doing Terraform end to end.
Yeah, I doubt it will be 100% end to end, depending on what services you're consuming and what's available with Terraform itself. So let's say if it's not compatible or something, you know, obviously you need to adapt a different route to solve the problem. But for instance, as a simple thing, you know, SES integration with the, you know, SNS, you know, as a basic example, SES is not supported by Terraform for obvious reasons. So, you know, how would you deal with that when it comes to, and you use Lambdas and other approaches that you can take in solving that, but, you know, that's a workaround. So yeah, I mean, I'm talking to you as I'm thinking, and you know, to your points. Thank you for your inputs. And why did you guys choose Ansible? Why, you know, if you're dealing with just AWS, why can't we just go with Systems Manager, which is also, you know, a serverless agent deployment kind of thing, which is managed by AWS itself, right? So.
The short answer is that we're a 12-year-old, 13-year-old company. So we predate even SQS. Up until about 3 years ago, we were doing a lot of our work cross-platform. And Ansible was a great way to normalize the differences between environments. But at the same time, if we had to make the decision again today, we probably still pick Ansible, but we use Ansible differently today. We don't use Ansible to manage running machines. Rather, we use it to configure machines that we then turn into AMIs.
Got it. Okay. Okay. That's
yeah. I think if we were doing a lot more, like Ansible definitely is not a great tool to keep servers up to date as they run. System Manager, I think, is much better.
Okay. Yeah, I'm using some Windows machines, and I'm having a hard time with Ansible. You know, but yeah, that's why, you know, we need to have some guidelines that dictate, okay, this kind of thing, Ansible or this one. So, okay, got it. Thank you for your, you know, answers.
Very welcome. Good questions.
Thanks.
Anyone else have Terraform questions?
Yes. Hi. My name is Tosin. My question is, I used to work for an organization where we use a cross accounts role. We have a management account where we delegate access to different accounts based on the role specified for the account. But now I left the company to an organization whereby they use SSO to authenticate into the AWS, and they delegate access through the SSO. Now, the way they use Terraform, they have to create IAM user, give users the credentials that they use. But AWS CLI version 2 actually supports SSO, where you can just run AWS configure SSO in your environment. You use it the way you use cross accounts role with profile on when you use cross account. But when they were trying to use Terraform with CLI version 2 on SSO, it gives error. Is it something that AWS supports now to use CLI version 2 with Terraform?
So there's two different things there. When you're using SSO, it now supports the credential process. It didn't for a while, but it does now. And as long as you have the AWS SDK config load or side load, whatever that environment variable is set, you can use SSO through the credential process. The CLI bastion is a little trickier, and I don't know the answer to that. But I know that you can do a general purpose proxy, general purpose through the bastion with Terraform, and that's fine, but because it uses Bodo under the hood. But I've never actually done it, and I don't know what pitfalls you might run into trying to get that sorted out.
Thank you.
Chris, there was a question from, I'm not going to try to say it, but he has had some really amazing questions tonight. Once you go with Golden AMI, your need for Ansible will probably go away, right?
Probably not for a while. For us, we use a hierarchy of AMIs. So we'll build a Golden AMI off Amazon Linux, and then we'll build AMIs for whatever type of component we need to deploy. And we basically we configure it to the last inch. And then in something like CloudFormation, in Cloud Init, we would do the last little bits of configuration. So Ansible, I think, is still a really convenient way to do that. The nice thing is Ansible Molecule is really, really good for doing unit testing, and also as a way to do module development with Vagrant. So it's a really great way to prototype new modules, and then you just drop them into your existing build template, and you suck down the golden AMI. And then you're not doing all sorts of crazy crap in CloudFormation and Cloud Init. You're just doing the last little bits.
Technically, we have like 11 questions that we reported on this, and I feel like we've covered a few of these just in your discussion.
Do we even know if the people who asked them are still on?
I'm not sure at this point. We just, once we got past like 8 of them, we kind of just stopped recording people's names on it. Do you want to look at that list on Slack and see if there's some quick ones you want to knock off from there?
Because if anything, the session's going to be recorded, but I also know it's 9:08, so we've officially hit that mark. Were there any other questions for Rafael too? While he looks at Slack.
I say if there's any more questions for people that are still standing, I'll take them. But if for the lightweights that dropped off, they can email me.
That's a fair statement there. Yeah, this has been really amazing. Lots of awesome feedback and conversations here. I don't know if you're seeing, how do you pronounce K8s?
Like Kubernetes? I think just K8s. Like that's how I've heard people say it.
Mm-hmm. K8, yeah.
I pronounce it Kubernetes.
Yeah.
We're good here. Thank you so much, everyone, for holding it strong with us this whole time.
Yeah, and I think right now I'm gonna stop the recording, but it should be up on our YouTube channel hopefully by the next 2 days. Awesome.
Yep.